The air is still tonight, and somewhere out beyond your window, the earth is holding its breath. You can almost feel it, can't you? That faint hum beneath the everyday noise, the quiet pulse of something older, something patient. Imagine the ground below you, like a great library, the shelves made of stone and sand, and every page a memory pressed flat by centuries. Most of those memories will never be read again, but some have a way of slipping back into the light. It starts with a sound, soft boots crunching over dry gravel, the hush of desert wind slipping between low dunes. Your flashlight beam catches on something buried just a glint a corner. You kneel, brush away the powdery grains, and there it is, a shape too perfect to be a rock, too deliberate to be chance. Your pulse picks up because you know, though you don't know how, that you're the first living soul to touch it in 1,000 years. This is how it goes again and again all over the world. Sometimes it's a weathered arch surfacing after a sandstorm. Sometimes it's a doorway revealed by melting ice. Sometimes it's just a whisper in a local story, something the elders don't speak of after dark. But when you follow those whispers, you find they lead into places where science gets quiet, where the evidence doesn't line up neatly, and where myths that were supposed to be bedtime stories suddenly feel like field reports. You'll find lost cities under inland seas, temples hanging from cliffs so high even condors hesitate to fly, and artifacts so old they seem to have been left behind by someone who wasn't quite us. You'll walk corridors barely wide enough for your shoulders, knowing they twist and turn for miles under your feet. You'll see carvings of stars from constellations we only rediscovered with modern telescopes. You'll hear a story repeated in the Sahara, in the Andes, in the islands of the Pacific, about the day the world drowned and the few who lived to start again. And sometimes you'll feel watched, not in the paranoid way, but in that slow, deliberate way that makes the hairs on your neck rise. The ancients had a knack for building places that hold your attention, even after you've gone places where shadows don't always match the shape of the walls. Maybe it's because they understood something we've forgotten. Or maybe it's because they were trying to keep something else out or in. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And if you do drop your location and your local time in the comments, I want to know where and when you're listening from. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started on tonight's journey together. We'll step into the shadows of deserts and mountains, through doors that were never meant to be opened, and along roads that lead to cities no map remembers. And by the time the night is over, you may find that history isn't so much written in books as it is whispered in stone. The desert is vast in every direction, a golden ocean without a tide, and you're standing in the middle of it, trying not to squint against the glare. The air has that dry, papery texture that seems to scrape your throat with every breath. Somewhere behind you, the last faint outline of a road has already been swallowed by the shifting dunes. Out here, there are no landmarks, just sand heat, and the unsettling sense that the ground beneath you isn't quite as empty as it looks. Your GPS says nothing useful. It just stares back with a flat gray screen, stubbornly refusing to load. The compass needle swings lazily like it's too tired to care. And then there it is. Not a shape, not yet. Just a feeling. The kind that says you're close to something older than the names for this place. The locals call it the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter. An endless expanse so barren that even the wind sounds lonely. It's the kind of place where you can disappear forever without a trace. And in the heart of this emptiness lies the story of Ubar, the Atlantis of Arabia. A city, the old poems swear, was cursed by God himself, torn apart in a single night, and buried so deeply that the sand itself swallows your footprints before you can turn around. For centuries, Ubar was just a name, a cautionary tale wrapped in Quranic verses about pride and downfall. Some scholars nodded politely, filed it under legend, and moved on. But in 1992, a satellite called Landsat passed over this wasteland and caught something strange, perfectly straight lines and hard-edged shapes under the dunes. Nature doesn't usually bother with straight lines. That was the first whisper. A joint team of explorers, archaeologists, and adventurers set out with the coordinates. Imagine it caravans of 4x4s carrying high-tech gear, rumbling into a place where the Bedouin will tell you even the wind has a mind of its own. What they found, at least according to the official reports, was anticlimactic crumbled limestone, a collapsed sinkhole fragments of ancient trading posts. But there's something about the way those reports trail off, the way photos were quietly pulled from public archives, that keeps the story alive. Those who've gone looking speak in tones you'd reserve for the supernatural. Instruments go haywire. Compass readings spiral into nonsense. After dark, the sand shifts in ways it shouldn't, as though it's flowing uphill, as though it has tides of its own. And then there are the disappearances. A guide with decades of desert experience wanders off for a short solo trip. Hours pass. His camels return without him food and water untouched. No tracks in the sand, no sign of struggle, just absence. One geologist, sunburned and trembling, swore he'd seen black stone walls under the surface walls that hummed like a giant sleeping heart. Days later, he was hospitalized for what the doctors called exhaustion. His notes recovered from his tent held the same sentence scribbled over and over, "It breathes below." Even now, Bedouin stories warn of jinn winds near the site, sharp sudden gusts that erase all traces of your path and scramble your sense of direction. Some talk of ruins that surface briefly after sandstorms, the top of an arch, a leaning column, a fragment of a wall, carved with script no one recognizes. And then by morning, the dunes reclaim it all. It's easy to see why some connect Ubar to the incense trade that once made Arabia unimaginably wealthy. For thousands of years, caravans loaded with frankincense gum, worth more than gold in the ancient world, crossed these deserts to feed the appetites of Egyptian priests, Roman emperors, and Indian kings. Any city that sat at the crossroads of those routes could grow rich beyond reason. And arrogance often follows wealth like a shadow. The legend says Ubar's rulers grew so proud they ignored divine warnings. One night, the earth opened. With a roar, the sand rose like a wave. And in the morning, nothing remained but a flat, rippling expanse. You crouch, brushing away the warm grit from a half-buried stone. The surface is smooth in places, etched in other shallow looping lines, unlike any Arabic script you've seen. It's not Sumerian. It's not Akkadian. It's something else. You look up and realize the horizon has shifted. The dune that was to your left is now dead ahead, though you haven't moved. The sun feels hotter, sharper, like it's leaning closer to see what you've found. Some academics will tell you the sinkhole at Shisar, collapsed into a limestone cave, was the true Ubar, and that's the end of the story. But there's a weight in the air here that disagrees. It presses on your skin like humidity that doesn't exist, whispers at the edge of hearing. You can almost make out words in the sighing wind, though they're in no language, you know. A friend back at camp tells you about a smuggled photo, an image that vanished from the internet hours after it was posted. It showed a massive archway, half buried, carved with patterns that looked more like circuitry than ornamentation. The man who took it reportedly said, "It's not there anymore," and refused to elaborate. You glance at your watch, but it's stopped. The digital face is frozen, not at zeros, but at an oddly symmetrical time, 11:11. The GPS flickers back to life, but the coordinates it shows point not to Arabia at all, but to the middle of the Indian Ocean. By the time you turn toward camp, the light is already fading into that amber wash that comes before desert night. Shadows stretch long and then vanish altogether. The sand under your boots feels softer, deeper, like walking across a giant's breathing chest. You keep your eyes on the faint glow of the campfire ahead, resisting the urge to glance back, because somehow you know that if you do, the fire will be gone. And somewhere out there, under miles of shifting dunes, a city waits. Maybe it's stone and mortar. Maybe it's something stranger. Maybe it's sleeping, as the legends say. Maybe it's listening. The air thins as you climb each breath, tasting faintly of moss and rain. Somewhere far below the jungle is still steaming from the morning's downpour. But up here, on a knife-edge ridge, where the clouds drift low enough to brush your shoulders, the world feels impossibly quiet. Even the birds keep their distance, their cries fading into the mist, like voices that know better than to linger. You've come looking for the Chachapoya, the so-called cloud people. That's what the Inca called them, at least Chachapoyak, warriors of the mist. But the Inca didn't give out nicknames lightly, and they didn't give them to just anyone. By the time the two cultures met, the Chachapoya had already been building their cliffside cities for centuries, stacking massive stones into walls that rose straight out of sheer drops. It's the kind of architecture that leaves you wondering, were they trying to keep enemies out? Or something else in... The chronicles written by early Spanish explorers don't help much except to sharpen the mystery. They describe the Chachapoya as unusually tall, pale-skinned, sometimes even with light hair features, rare in this part of the Andes. They tell of villages clinging to cliff faces, like barnacles of warriors whose agility on the ridges made them nearly impossible to ambush. And then there's the medicine skulls, with neat round holes from cranial surgeries, trepanations, that show clear signs of healing. Not only did the Chachapoya cut into the skull without killing the patient, they did it well enough for the patient to live on. In the 1400s, that was almost unthinkable. Your guide, a wiry man with the weathered face of someone who spent his life above the tree line, leads you along a ledge barely wider than your boots. Below, the clouds churn like a slow-moving river. He doesn't speak much, but when he does, it's to point out the stone shapes jutting from the fog ahead. Kuelap, sometimes called the Machu Picchu of the north. The walls rise 60 feet high, and yet they were somehow dragged up here block by block without the help of wheels or beasts of burden. The precision of their placement is baffling. No mortar, just gravity and ingenuity holding them in place for over 1,000 years. But Kuelap is just the capital. It's the smaller, more isolated sites that really tangle your thoughts. Places like Karagia, where human-shaped sarcophagi, some nearly 8 feet tall, stand in tight ranks along vertical cliffs facing out into the empty air. Painted white and red with ochre, they resemble sentinels more than coffins. And that's before you realize that some of them aren't in caves or alcoves. They're perched in natural crevices hundreds of feet above the ground with no visible way to reach them. Even modern climbers struggle to access these ledges without advanced gear. The Chachapoya had rope and wood, and yet they placed their dead up there again and again, as if it was the only fitting place for them. Local legends suggest the dead didn't travel alone. That enormous birds, no longer seen today, carried the coffins to their resting places. At first, it sounds like the kind of folklore you'd file under poetic metaphor, until you see how many different villages tell the same story. The wind picks up as you reach another ruin, this one swallowed almost entirely by moss. Your guide points to a section of wall where the stones form a perfect curve, enclosing what would have been a ceremonial space. He calls it the Temple of the Whispering Stones, but insists you keep your voice low as you step inside. At first, you think it's superstition. Then you speak, just above a whisper, and hear your own words carry clear and intact from somewhere deep in the structure. The acoustics are unnatural, as if the temple itself is listening and answering back. In the 1970s, a forbidden expedition, no permits, no government approval, claimed to have found another temple carved directly into a vertical cliff above the Marañón River. Photographs were smuggled out narrow corridors, every surface worked smooth, the layout twisting like a labyrinth. In one chamber, you could stand at one end and whisper into the stone, only to have your words emerge perfectly at the far end hundreds of feet away. The whispers didn't always stop when the people speaking them did. Back in the present, you watch your breath curl in the cold air. It's the kind of chill that seeps into your bones slowly, the kind that makes you feel watched. The guide's eyes dart once toward the fog, then back to the path. He doesn't explain, but you remember the story you read before coming here about the climbing team in 2004, who vanished for 11 days while trying to reach a newly spotted row of sarcophagi. When they reappeared, dehydrated and silent, they refused to say what happened. One man, months later, whispered to his sister, "They were never dead. They just sleep." If the Chachapoya were guarding something, they never told anyone what it was. Maybe it was a relic. Maybe it was knowledge. Or maybe it was the dead themselves, protected hidden and watched over, until some unspoken condition was met. The Inca tried to conquer them, and eventually did, but even the Inca seemed to tread lightly around certain sites. The Spanish came later, bringing disease, and dismantling much of what was left, yet entire swaths of Chachapoya territory remain unexplored, not because no one's interested, but because those who venture too far have a way of not coming back. You find yourself glancing into the mist, imagining the silent ranks of cliff-face sarcophagi out there, their painted faces staring into the void, their eyes carved wide and unblinking. Perhaps they are guardians. Perhaps they are prisoners. Perhaps they are neither. And the real mystery lies in what the Chachapoya saw in these heights, a place worth clinging to, worth building, worth defending, long after the last stone was set. Somewhere far below, the jungle exhales. A curtain of cloud rises, and for the briefest moment, you see it, another wall, another curve of stone far across the gorge where no path leads. The fog closes again, just as quickly, and you're left wondering whether it was ever really there. Up here, in the thin air and the shifting white, you begin to understand why they called them the Cloud People. They didn't just live in the clouds, they hid in them, built in them, buried in them. And when they were gone, they took their sky-bound secrets with them, leaving only whispers for anyone bold or foolish enough to listen. The eucalyptus trees creak in the hot wind, their narrow shadows stretching like black ropes over the ochre earth. The air smells of dry bark and something sharper dust that's been baked for centuries. You step between low sandstone cliffs, following a narrow cleft just wide enough for a single person to pass. At first, you think you're heading into another one of Australia's countless gorges. But then the path tightens, the rock faces draw close, and you see them. The carvings are smaller than you expect, rows of neat vertical symbols, each one etched so precisely into the stone, it seems impossible they've been sitting here in the open for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. Some are shaped like birds with long curved beaks. Others look like the Egyptian Ankh, the cross with a looped top that symbolizes life. A few are more unsettling, elongated human forms with oddly bent limbs and eyes that seem far too large. These are the so-called Gosford glyphs, tucked away in the bushland north of Sydney, in a place so quiet you can hear the wind moving through the grass like the sea. They don't look like Aboriginal rock art. No dots, no spirals, none of the familiar Dreamtime figures. These are something else entirely, something that looks for all the world like the hieroglyphs you'd expect to find in the Valley of the Kings. The mainstream explanation is straightforward. They're fakes. Early 20th century settlers may be bored or maybe trying to leave their own mysterious mark, came here and carved them into the sandstone. That's the safe answer. But it's not without problems. There are no records of anyone admitting to it, no sketches or photos from before the 1970s. And most awkward of all, the sandstone weathering looks far older than a few decades. You run your hand over a symbol of a falcon-headed figure, feeling the groove in the stone. It's shallow, but clean, no crumbling at the edges. Whatever tools were used, they cut deep and straight, like the marks left by copper chisels on Egyptian monuments. Some independent researchers claim they can even translate sections of the wall. One supposed account speaks of shipwrecked Egyptian sailors' priests fleeing political chaos during the reign of Akhenaten. They tell of a journey across the great southern ocean to a red land where one of their princes died and was buried nearby. Local Aboriginal elders, when asked, tend to fall silent. Some will say only that there are old stories about pale-skinned visitors who came by sea and vanished. Others speak of sky people who brought symbols and knowledge, leaving their markings before returning to the stars. Push too hard, and you'll be told simply, not all knowledge is for outsiders. Beyond the main wall, partially hidden by bush and rock, there's another set of glyphs, rarer, less photographed. These are different detailed star charts, humanoid figures with enormous almond-shaped eyes, and what looks suspiciously like a map of constellations not easily visible from Earth's surface. Some call this panel forbidden, saying even the custodians of the land prefer not to approach it. Whether that's cultural respect, superstition, or something else entirely is hard to say. Your boots crunch over gravel as you follow a faint trail to a vantage point above the cleft. The two sandstone walls face each other like the sides of an open book. You imagine Egyptian sailors standing here, sunburned and exhausted from a voyage halfway around the world, carving the story of their survival into the rock. Or maybe it wasn't them at all. Maybe these symbols are older, still copied and recopied by different hands over time, their original meaning long lost. In recent years, satellite imaging of the surrounding bushland has hinted at something stranger. Faint, rectangular shapes buried under soil and foliage aligned in a grid. They're too regular to be random geology. Could there be foundations of structures here, long eroded, but still detectable from above? Or is it just another case of the human brain seeing patterns in chaos? The Australian government, for its part, doesn't seem eager to investigate. Official conservation efforts have been inconsistent. Sometimes crews will clear vegetation and protect the glyphs from vandalism. Other times, funding disappears and the site is left to fade. There have even been quiet attempts to cover or damage the carvings. You get the feeling there's a balance being kept here, an unspoken agreement not to let too much attention settle on the place. One park ranger, speaking off the record, once told a journalist, "It's not about hiding aliens or Egyptians. It's about keeping the past in the past. Some stories cause more trouble than they solve." He wouldn't elaborate. You kneel for a closer look at a section near the base of the wall, where the carvings are worn nearly smooth. Here, the sandstone's natural grain runs right through the glyphs, showing that they weren't simply painted or etched on a surface crust. They were cut deep into fresh rock, then left to weather over time. The sun shifts, throwing long shadows across the cleft, and the figures seem to change their lines, merging and breaking apart. One elongated figure now looks less human, more like something halfway between bird and man. its head tilted as if listening. The air feels heavy in the narrow space. You catch yourself whispering, though you're not sure why. Maybe it's the feeling that you've stepped into someone else's message, one that was never meant for you, yet still stands unblinking in the stone. As you turn to leave, a glint catches your eye, a small chipped fragment lying in the dust at the edge of the path. It's sandstone like the cliff, but the edge is too sharp, the angle too perfect to be natural. You slip it into your pocket, thinking you'll examine it later, and continue back toward the trees. The wind picks up again, rattling the eucalyptus leaves, so they sound like distant surf. For a moment, you can almost imagine the coastline as it might have been thousands of years ago, a safe harbor for a ship built on the far side of the world, crewed by men carrying gods in their minds and chisels in their hands. Did they carve their story here to be remembered or to be forgotten, until someone like you stumbled into the cleft, squinting at the walls, wondering what truths are worth carrying across an ocean of time? Behind you, the glyphs stand silent. Whether they're the work of ancient Egyptians, Aboriginal shamans, or an imagination that spans both myth and history, they've done their job. They've made you wonder. And in this place, maybe that's the only thing that matters. It shows up quietly, the way the most dangerous things often do not in a blaze of glory, but as a line item in an auction catalog. Lot 72. Illuminated Codex, circa 4000 BCE. Language undetermined. That date alone is enough to make a historian choke on their coffee. The earliest known writing Sumerian cuneiform doesn't appear until around 3200 BCE. Egyptian hieroglyphs, roughly the same time. If this codex really is from 4000 BCE, then someone was writing down complex thoughts 1,000 years before history officially began. And the kicker, no one can read it. You can picture the auction room in Geneva. Dark wood panels, expensive suits, the faint smell of old books and older money. No photographs are allowed and no reporters are present. The codex changes hands quietly, and that should have been the end of it until years later, fragments of its pages begin to leak. The first image shows thick yellowed sheets, bound in what looks like animal skin. Not unusual for an ancient manuscript, except that the binding is laced with tiny silvery threads that shimmer when the light hits them. Later, analysis would reveal the ink is organic, but laced with iridium, an element rare in Earth's crust, but common in meteorites. Whoever made this wasn't just crushing up berries and charcoal. They had access to materials from the stars. The symbols themselves don't match any known language. Some sit neatly on a baseline like modern script. Others float in the middle of the page, unattached to anything, as if they were meant to hover. A few twist into perfect spirals, mathematically precise, more like the diagrams in a physics paper than the letters in an alphabet. When the first fragment is run through advanced pattern recognition software, it returns something halfway between translation and hallucination. A net of mirrors spans the world, carrying the minds of many through silver veins where truth and lies flow as one. It's poetic, cryptic, and unnervingly familiar. To anyone who's lived through the rise of the internet, of course, skeptics cry forgery. They say the codex is a modern hoax with artificially aged materials cooked up to trick laboratories. But the carbon dating comes back consistent across three different institutions: the parchment, the ink, even the microbial decay patterns all point to staggering antiquity. If it's fake, it's the kind of fake that would require prehistoric tools, materials from meteorites, and the skill to mimic centuries of wear. The weirdness doesn't stop there. Among the leaked images is a folded vellum. Insert a diagram of concentric circles intersected by geometric lines. At first, it looks like sacred geometry, the kind you see in medieval mysticism. But when someone overlays it on a globe, the intersection points line up almost perfectly with ancient sites like Giza, Stonehenge, Mohenjo-Daro, and oddly several modern data centers in the United States and China. Coincidence maybe. Or maybe someone thousands of years ago was mapping an infrastructure we haven't even finished building yet. Then there are the pages that refuse to be photographed, not because of copyright or secrecy, but because the images simply won't register. Cameras' glitch files corrupt, and scanners return nothing but static. A lab technician swears he saw the symbols shift while he was looking at them. Not on the page, but in his head. You can't remember what you just read, he says later, only that it was wrong. Or too right. Some theorists go further, claiming the codex isn't just a book. It's a kind of mental seed, a trigger designed to implant concepts directly into human consciousness. If that sounds absurd, remember that cultures throughout history have described sacred words that couldn't be spoken aloud, or that changed the listener forever. The difference here is that the medium isn't a chant. It's a set of symbols you can't forget even if you try. The codex's current location is unknown. Some whisper that it was quietly transferred to a vault beneath the Vatican, filed alongside other texts deemed too dangerous or disruptive for public release. Others say it's in the hands of a reclusive tech billionaire obsessed with ancient AI theory, convinced the book holds the blueprint for a self-evolving consciousness. And a few, always, a few insist it was never a physical book at all, but something much stranger, a relic encoded in the collective memory of humanity, a story that writes itself into our myths until we're ready to read it. You think about that as you study the leaked images, the curling ink strokes that seem to shimmer even on a low-res screen. It's not just the age that's unsettling. It's the precision, the confidence of the hand that made them. Whoever wrote this wasn't experimenting. They knew exactly what they were recording. You imagine sitting in the flickering light of a fire, 6,000 years ago, a flat slab of meteorite on your lap, serving as an inkstone, the skin of some long-ago animal stretched and smoothed into parchment. Outside, the night sky is thick with stars we've long since stopped seeing. And there, with the patient focus of someone who knows they're working for a future, they'll never see you dip the quill and begin to write not for your people, not for your time, but for someone who will come much later, carrying tools you can't imagine and still struggling to understand what you meant. The wind rattles the blinds. The leaked page on your desk doesn't move, but for just a second, you could swear the spirals in the margin have shifted. Somewhere in some locked and windowless room, the rest of the codex waits silent, patient like a question you haven't learned how to ask yet. The road to the site is the kind of thing you only take once narrow, uneven curling through a jagged spine of hills in southeastern Anatolia, where the light always seems to slant at an odd angle. Your driver, a man with the kind of face that looks older than his years, says little. He only gestures ahead toward a low ridge where the wind whistles in a way that makes the back of your neck prickle. The discovery began with a shepherd. That's how these things often start someone local, someone walking the same paths every day, someone who knows when the ground feels wrong. He'd noticed a hollow sound when his boot struck a certain patch of earth, and later, a narrow fissure no wider than a fist. When the first team of amateur explorers squeezed inside, they emerged with eyes-wide voices shaking. The cave they'd found wasn't a cave at all. It was a burial chamber carved with a precision no one could explain. Walls so straight they could have been cut with a blade of light. At its center lay a sarcophagus of black stone, seamless, polished to a dull sheen, and marked only by 12 notches, 6 along the head, 6 along the foot. Opening it took hours. When the lid finally shifted, the flashlights caught on something that made one man drop his torch a skeleton human, but not quite. Even lying flat, its proportions were wrong. The long bones suggested a height of nearly 8 feet in life. The skull elongated not from binding or cultural modification, but naturally so had cranial sutures that didn't match Homo sapiens or any known hominin. And then there were the hands and feet, 6 fingers, 6 toes, perfectly formed, symmetrical, no sign of deformity. Not mutations, blueprints. Word spread quickly, too quickly. Within 48 hours, Turkish authorities arrived cordoning off the area and declaring it unsafe due to seismic instability. The shepherd who made the discovery was never seen again. His family claimed he'd been taken to help with official matters and simply never returned. Official statements later claimed that no viable DNA could be retrieved, but those who had been there in the first days tell a different story. One former researcher, speaking anonymously, swore that the genetic sequencing was successful, but what it revealed didn't fit anywhere on the human family tree. The genome carried human markers, yes, but alongside them were sequences that matched nothing in any terrestrial database. Not Neanderthal, not Denisovan, not even primate. The most unsettling part: the mitochondrial DNA passed down the maternal line showed no match to any known ancestor. It was, in their words, foreign. The carvings inside the tomb deepened the strangeness. Spirals, loops, and branching shapes that looked less like language and more like diagrams of thought itself. A single symbol appeared again and again, a 6-fingered handprint encircled by a serpent biting its own tail. Eternity, or entrapment, or both. Attempts to re-enter the chamber have been blocked at every turn. The entrance, visible in early photographs, is now hidden beneath a structure that from satellite imagery appears metallic and angular. The entire ridge has been reclassified as a natural gas hazard zone, though no drilling has ever taken place. Around kitchen tables and in dimly lit cafes, the theories multiply. Some link the skeletons to ancient myths from Sumer and India, tales of god kings and sky people who ruled for a time before vanishing. In Hopi legend, the ant people sheltered humanity underground during a cataclysm. In Norse lore, giants walked the earth before men. Could these bones be the origin of those stories? Others point to the recurrence of polydactyly extra fingers and toes in ancient art. From the stone statues of Easter Island to the petroglyphs in North America, figures with 6 fingers appear more often than coincidence should allow. If this trait was once associated with rulership or divinity, perhaps it wasn't symbolic at all. Perhaps it was literal. But what unsettles you most are the whispers about the other sarcophagi. The black stone coffin that was opened was only one of 7 in the chamber. 6 remain sealed. If the beings inside share the same non-human traits, the implications are staggering, not just for archaeology, but for the story of humanity itself. You imagine standing in that chamber, the air heavy with the scent of stone, and time the beam of your torch, catching on a handprint carved with 6 long fingers, its edges smoothed by centuries. You think of the DNA reports, foreign impossible, and wonder what exactly those sequences would code for if expressed in flesh again. Was this a burial place or a vault? Were these beings honored leaders, exiled criminals, or something stranger? A hybrid experiment from an age before our history began. The wind shifts as you reach the ridge, carrying with it a dry metallic tang. Somewhere beneath your feet in the sealed dark, the others still lie waiting. And if one was uncovered before the authorities intervened, it's hard not to wonder how many more are scattered beneath these hills, their black stone coffins hidden beneath layers of soil and silence. The guide beside you mutters something in Turkish, too quiet to catch, and quickens his pace back toward the vehicle. You take one last look at the slope, its surface bare and unremarkable. Somewhere under that unbroken skin of earth, an elongated skull rests in the dark, its extra fingers folded neatly over its ribs. You don't know whether the thought chills you or calls to you, but either way, you know this. Whatever is in those other 6 sarcophagi, it hasn't been forgotten. It's been hidden. And things are rarely hidden without a reason. The journey to the lake begins with silence. Not the kind that comes from absence, but the kind that feels deliberate, like the land is holding its breath. Russia's Altai mountains rise in jagged layers around you, their peaks fading into low clouds, the slopes streaked with the white veins of old snow. Here, there are no highways, no power lines, just a single dirt track that dissolves into grass long before you reach the water. The locals don't use the lake's real name. In public, they call it the place with no fish or that water. In private, they sometimes call it Dishit Ozero, the lake that breathes. It's not poetic exaggeration. If you camp here long enough, You might see it for yourself. On certain nights, a soft ripple swells across the surface even when the air is still. At the same time, a faint light blue-white like moonlight, seen through glass, seems to pulse upward from beneath, as if the water itself is inhaling and exhaling. The first recorded discovery came in 1996, when an unusually dry summer dropped the water level low enough to expose part of the northern shore. A group of fishermen stumbled on something impossible, a line of flat black stones laid in perfect alignment, forming what looked like a road leading straight into the lake. The stones were too regular, too carefully set to be natural. Word traveled to Novosibirsk State University, and by autumn a small research team had arrived. What they found changed the tone from curiosity to disbelief. Just a few meters beneath the surface lay streets paved with the same black stone, their edges sharp despite the centuries. Pillars rose from the lake bed, some still upright, others toppled but intact, each carved with shallow glyphs no one could identify. Diving deeper, they discovered the remains of doorways, arch-like structures that led nowhere, their frames built to a precise mathematical ratio found in sacred architecture from Egypt to Angkor. But the water around these ruins was wrong. Compasses spun aimlessly. Digital instruments flickered or went dark entirely. Cameras returned only static. And divers reported something stranger, still disorientation, sudden nausea, and more than once hallucinations. One former military diver later described seeing tall, glowing figures moving slowly between the buildings. They didn't swim or walk, they just moved without disturbing the water. He surfaced, shaking, and refused to dive again. The team managed to retrieve a single artifact, a disk of black stone covered in swirling carvings. Under certain angles, the pattern seemed to shift, not rotate or change exactly, but resist being understood as if the line slid just out of your mental focus. The object was sent to a lab for analysis. Weeks later, the lab burned down in what was officially called an electrical fire. The artifact was never mentioned again. Carbon dating of wooden beams pulled from a collapsed structure yielded wildly inconsistent results, some as young as 8,000 years, others over $24,000. A geologist on the team suggested the anomalies might be due to radiation exposure, though no source was identified. The readings spiked only sporadically, as if whatever caused them was intermittent or sleeping. The real shock came when sonar scans mapped the lake bed. Beneath the visible ruins far below, the silt was another structure, a perfect dome 40 meters across, metallic by the echoes it returned. Plans were drawn to investigate, but before the expedition could begin, the Russian military abruptly declared the area a protected biosphere. No further dives would be permitted. All prior research was classified. Locals will tell you the story without hesitation if you buy them tea and keep your voice low. According to the elders of the Alai people, the city wasn't built, it was brought. The star shepherds descended in chariots of fire and silver, teaching their ancestors the secrets of stone and sky. The city thrived until it was deliberately hidden beneath the water, sealed to protect something or someone. The elders say it will rise again when the stars remember the path. Standing on the shore now, it's hard to imagine the weight of what lies beneath. The surface looks ordinary, cold, dark, opaque. The only hint comes in those moments when the lake breathes a slow, spreading glow from below, bright enough to light the undersides of the clouds. Some say the light pulses like a heartbeat. You kneel and touch the water. It's colder than it should be, even for this altitude, and there's a strange texture to it, as if the molecules are slightly out of step with each other. Your fingers tingle faintly when you pull them out. In the camp that night, the wind off the lake is so still it feels like it's waiting. The fire pops and hisses. Across the water, a faint shimmer rises barely visible through the mist. For a moment, it almost looks like the curve of a dome outlined in light. Then it fades, and the surface goes dark again. You lie awake, long after the others are asleep, listening to the quiet. It's not that the lake is making a sound. It's that everything else has gone silent for it. No night insects, no splash of fish, no wind in the reeds. Just the heavy, patient stillness of something beneath the water breathing. You don't know whether it's alive or if it's just a machine that's been running since long before human history began. Either way, you get the same feeling you'd get standing at the mouth of a deep cave, the certainty that something is down there in the dark aware of you. And if the elders are right, it's only waiting for the right constellation to appear before it rises again. It's not in a museum. It's not in any official registry. The first time the black disk was seen by the outside world, it was resting on a table in a small rural museum in Guizhou province under a flickering fluorescent light, without so much as a protective case around it. The story of how it got there is as strange as the object itself, unearthed in 1991 from beneath the collapsed stones of a crumbling watchtower on a forested ridge lying in a shallow pit that looked more like an altar than a burial. The disk is about a meter across, smooth and almost perfectly circular, but it's not made of bronze or stone. In sunlight, it gleams like obsidian deep black, but with a glassy reflection. And yet when scientists tested a sliver from a flaked edge, they found no volcanic glass. Instead, the surface displayed the properties of both obsidian and monocrystalline silicon, only purer than any silicon modern labs can produce without industrial clean rooms. For the first few weeks, it was just a curiosity until someone decided to test its reflective qualities. Under normal light, it behaved like any polished surface, returning a crisp image of whatever was in front of it. But under direct midday sunlight, something changed. At first, the temperature at the disk's center rose quickly, as though the surface was focusing the light inward. Within seconds, a scrap of wood began to smoke. Paper ignited at half a meter away. Even stone placed in the focal zone began to crack from the heat. One researcher joked about ancient death rays. No one laughed when the experiment scorched the test platform. It wasn't just focusing light, it was amplifying it, bending it, creating a pinpoint of heat intense enough to rival a blowtorch. And the amplification wasn't a simple parabola like a modern solar cooker. The beam could be shifted without moving the disk, almost as if the surface itself was reconfiguring to find its target. There was no metal in its makeup, no copper, tin, or iron. The molecular arrangement, when examined under electron microscopy, showed an unnatural uniformity, like a crystal grown under perfectly controlled conditions. This was not Bronze Age craftsmanship. It was something else entirely. Then they turned it over. On the back, beneath a crust of centuries-old sediment, was an engraving, a map, but not of any territory known today. Concentric rings of land surrounded by equally concentric seas. Symbols lined the edges, none of them Chinese. Some said it looked like the legendary map of Atlantis described by Plato. Others thought it matched the strange pre-Ice Age outlines seen in the controversial Piri Reis map. The Disca's time in Guizhou was short. Within weeks, officials arrived, packed it into a sealed crate, and shipped it to an urban conservation facility. Rumor has it that the military took custody soon after. The museum's records for that month vanished. That might have been the end of it, but 2 years later, a second disc turned up, this time thousands of kilometers away in a sealed tomb near the Taklamakan Desert. Same size, same material, same mirror-like face. But this one was broken cleanly, in half, as though split by enormous force. Even fractured, it retained some of its power. When sunlight struck the shards, heat bloomed at the edges, strong enough to blister skin. And then there was the strange phenomenon when the broken disc was placed near its intact twin lightweight objects. Dust small pebbles would hover a millimeter above the ground between them, as if some unseen force was pushing upward. No magnets, no static charge, just a field no one could explain. Legends from the region tell of the Yellow Emperor Huangdi receiving 2 sky mirrors from celestial beings who descended on dragons of fire. The story says he was warned never to use them against other humans. But during the Battle of Zhuolu, facing an enemy with chariots of smoke and metal, he defied the command. The sky turned white, the wind stopped, and the enemy army vanished in a column of flame. The mirrors, the tale says, were then hidden at opposite ends of the empire, guarded by silence. Skeptics argue that the discs are simply magic mirrors, a known Chinese artifact type from the Han Dynasty, which could project hidden patterns when sunlight reflected off them. But no surviving bronze mirror can burn wood crackstone or levitate dust. And no magic mirror was made from a silicon-like crystal that modern industry struggles to replicate. There are whispers, always whispers, of a third disc. Supposedly, it lies in a sealed chamber beneath a modern research facility kept under constant temperature control. Guards aren't there to protect it from thieves, but to ensure that no one attempts to wake it under sunlight. Standing on that ridge in Guizhou, where the first disc was found, you can see the forest slope away in all directions, a quilt of green broken by pale scars of exposed stone. It's quiet here, but not comfortably so. You feel the same prickling sense you get before a summer storm, as though the air is holding a charge. It's easy to imagine someone centuries, millennia ago, hauling that black mirror up here, setting it in place, and angling it toward the horizon. Maybe they were signaling an ally hundreds of miles away. Maybe they were focusing the sun's wrath on an enemy's gates. Or maybe they were simply watching the sky, waiting for the dragons of fire to return and claim what was theirs. Either way, the result is the same. The mirrors are gone, now taken from the hills and buried in vaults. But you can't help but feel that they're not entirely dormant, that somewhere under lock and key, that black glass is still catching stray beams of light and focusing them into a point so hot it could burn a hole in time. The first glimpse of Mount Kailash comes like a trick of the light. One moment, the horizon is just another jagged line of snow-capped peaks, and the next, it's there a flawless pyramid rising alone, its sides so sharply defined they look cut by a chisel. Clouds curl lazily around its summit. But you get the strange sense they're keeping their distance, orbiting rather than touching. By rights, Kailash should be just another Himalayan giant. At 6,038 meters, it's not even the tallest in its range. But nothing about this mountain plays by the rules. Its four sheer faces align almost exactly with the cardinal directions. Its slopes descend at perfectly consistent angles, as though sketched with a compass and straight edge. From a distance, it doesn't look like a mountain at all. It looks like a monument. To four major religions, it's the axis of the world. Hindus believe it's the home of Lord Shiva, seat of destruction and renewal. Buddhists say it's the domain of the fierce deity Demchok. Jains hold it as the place where their first spiritual teacher achieved liberation. Followers of the ancient Bon faith call it the dwelling of sky gods and serpent spirits. In every tradition, Kailash is sacred and untouchable. No human has ever reached the summit. Not because it's impossible, but because it's forbidden. The Chinese government, which controls the region, cites cultural and environmental preservation. Pilgrims are allowed to walk the Kora Fa, the 52-kilometer circuit around the mountain, but climbing it is off limits. The last serious attempt was in the 1980s, when famed mountaineer Reinhold Messner was granted tentative permission, then abruptly told no. Messner didn't protest. "You don't climb such a mountain," he said later. "It would be a sin." Still whispers persist that the ban is about more than respect. In 1999, a series of classified satellite scans briefly leaked before being pulled offline. Those who saw them claim the images showed vast hollow chambers inside the mountain, linked by straight tunnel-like voids. At the very center, a spiral-shaped cavity eerily similar to a conch shell, a shape considered sacred in both Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. The landscape around Kailash is just as strange. To the north lie two lakes, Manasarovar and Rakshastal freshwater and saltwater, round and crescent-shaped side by side. By the laws of hydrology, water should flow from the higher to the lower. But here, the freshwater lake sits above. The saltwater one, connected by a channel that somehow carries water uphill. From above the mountain and its surrounding ridgelines, form patterns that seem deliberate. Superimpose certain ancient diagrams, like the Sri Yantra, or the mythical map of Mount Meru. And the correlations are almost perfect. Too perfect, some say, to be coincidence. Legends tell of the serpent architects, star beings who built Kailash as a spiritual engine, a kind of cosmic switchboard connecting the earth to unseen energies. Some pilgrims speak of time behaving strangely on the Kora. A day feels like hours, or hours stretch into what seems like days. Watches malfunction, compass needles twitch, and always the mountain looms overhead, impossibly symmetrical, as if it's watching you back. There are modern accounts, too. Russian explorers in the 1930s reported losing time entirely while in the area, emerging from a 2-day trek to discover that weeks had passed outside. In the 1980s, an Indian Army patrol claimed to have seen the mountain glowing at dusk, not with sunlight, but from within the whole peak, lit with a soft, cold radiance. Standing at the base, you can understand why no one challenges the taboo. The air here feels heavier, as though it's pressing down from above. Even the wind sounds different, less like a natural force, and more like something whispering in a language you don't quite know. Your guide, a leathery-faced pilgrim who's walked the Kora more times than he can count, points to a spot on the southern face where the snow patterns form a distinct cross-like mark. He says it's a door, and that it only opens when the light and the breath are aligned. You ask what that means. He shrugs as if to say, if you have to ask, you're not ready to know. You join the slow line of pilgrims circling the mountain. Some walk barefoot, despite the ice. Some spin prayer wheels with every step. Some stop to prostrate themselves fully on the ground before rising and moving forward. The path is grueling, but you feel an odd sense of momentum, as if the mountain itself is pulling you along. At one point, the clouds part, and the summit is framed against an impossible blue sky. You feel the urge to measure it, to rationalize it, but the tape measure in your mind fails. It's too exact to be an accident, too immense to be entirely the work of hands, and too alive to be only stone. By the time you complete the circuit, the sun is setting. The last light hits the western face, and for a heartbeat, the entire surface seems to shimmer. It could be a trick of the atmosphere. It could be your imagination. Or it could be the mountain acknowledging your presence before folding back into stillness. As you turn to leave, you glance back one more time. The symmetry, the orientation, the sense of deliberate construction. It all feels like an unanswered question in the shape of a mountain. And in that moment, you understand why no one dares to stand on its summit. Some peaks are not meant to be conquered. Some are meant to be kept exactly as they are, for purposes we've long forgotten. But the mountain remembers. The Baltic in late summer looks calm from the shore, just a stretch of gray-green water under an equally gray sky. But the divers who know these waters will tell you it's deceptive. The sea here is fickle. Its currents twist without warning. Its visibility shifts from clear to blind in a heartbeat. And its floor hides more wrecks than most coastlines on Earth. The team that went down that morning wasn't looking for anything extraordinary. They were a mix of experienced recreational divers and amateur maritime historians chasing rumors of an undiscovered 17th century merchant ship. Their sonar sweep had shown something large on the seabed, a long, low silhouette resting 30 meters down, right where old charts suggested a trade route once ran. The first sign that this was no ordinary wreck was the shape of the stones. Stones, not timbers. As the divers descended through the cool gloom, the structure resolved into something like a massive terrace, its blocks squared and laid in tight, deliberate patterns. Then the beam of a headlamp swung wide, and the terrace ended abruptly, spilling into a scatter of bones. Not fish bones. The first skull that came into view stopped the lead diver cold. It was human-shaped, but far too large, nearly twice the size of an average adult's. The jaw was massive, the brow pronounced, the teeth worn flat, like those of someone who had spent a lifetime grinding food tougher than any modern diet. More lights found more remains. Massive femurs, wide rib cages, long finger bones curled like pale reeds. Some skeletons lay sprawled as if in the middle of a fight. Others were arranged side by side, still encased in corroded armor that shimmered green with centuries of corrosion. But the armor wasn't iron. It was bronze, thick and intricately worked with geometric engravings no one recognized. Dozens of them scattered across the seabed. The divers worked quickly, snapping photographs and taking careful measurements, but every minute below burned through precious air. A few managed to pry loose small fragments of metal and bone, stowing them in mesh bags for analysis. One diver, later regretting it, pulled a twisted bronze rod from the hand of a skeleton. It ended in a cluster of concentric rings, like a tuning fork designed for something other than sound. When the team surfaced, they could barely contain their excitement. But the celebration was short-lived. 2 days later, before a return dive could be made, the area was closed by maritime authorities. The reason given was environmental hazard due to munitions, a common enough excuse in waters that still hide the detritus of 2 world wars. No permits for diving have been issued there since. One photo smuggled out before the lockdown shows a skeleton lying beside a diver's tank for scale. The proportions are undeniable. Whoever this was, they stood at least 7.5 feet tall in life, with limbs thicker than a strong man's thigh. The helmet beside the skull is dented and split, but even in its ruined state, the craftsmanship is exquisite. The find has fueled a dozen theories. Some point to the Jötnar of Norse myth giants who roamed the world before the age of men. Others link the remains to Bronze Age legends of warrior castes bred for strength, possibly mercenaries or bodyguards for rulers whose names are lost to history. Skeptics suggest it's simply a case of prehistoric humans with unusual stature, their bones distorted by centuries underwater. But then there's the matter of the inscriptions. One recovered fragment of armor bears a series of straight angular marks, not runes, not Latin, not any known script. They bear a striking resemblance to petroglyphs found thousands of kilometers away in the Caucasus Mountains, carved into cliff sides that predate most recorded history. The question that lingers is why they were here on the Baltic floor in the first place. Was this the site of a battle, a burial ground? or the remains of a ship that never made it to shore. One diver's private log hints at something stranger. He claimed that when he first spotted the giant skeleton, he recovered the rod from there had been something clenched between its teeth, a flat black disc the size of a coin, perfectly smooth. He tried to remove it, but couldn't. It was as if the jaw had fused shut around it. He didn't mention it to the others, afraid of ridicule. That same diver now refuses to talk about the dive at all. Local fishermen who've worked the area for generations speak in half-jokes about the deep men whose bones rest below. In older stories, they were said to walk the shore on foggy nights, their heads nearly touching the low clouds, carrying weapons like staves of bronze. The tales faded as modern fishing boats replaced rowers, but the fishermen still avoid that patch of sea, claiming the compasses go lazy there and the sonar returns nonsense. You stand on the beach nearest to the site, the wind carrying the salt, sharp smell of the Baltic. There's no marker out there, no buoy, nothing to hint at what rests beneath the surface. Just flat water and the slow roll of small waves toward shore. It's the kind of calm that hides things well. Things like stone terraces, things like bronze-armored skeletons whose proportions don't fit in the story we've told ourselves about our past. And maybe if the diver's story about the disk is true, things that still hold on to whatever it was they carried with them into the deep things that were never meant to be found. If you didn't know what you were looking at, you might walk right past them, small, unremarkable lumps of metal, no bigger than a fist, half buried in the ochre soil of South Africa's Wonderstone mine. The miners who first uncovered them in the 1980s thought they were just geological oddities, strange little spheres with grooves running around their circumference. They were smooth, too smooth, as if they had been polished by a craftsman with infinite patience. Then came the odd part. The rock in which they were found dated to about 2.8 billion years ago. Not million. Billion. That's over 1 billion years before the first multicellular life appeared on Earth, let alone humans with the skills to make anything. And yet here, they were perfectly formed metallic spheres with 3 parallel grooves encircling them like the lathe marks on a machined part. There are 2 types. Some are made from a bluish metal, with white flecks, pyrophyllite, a mineral soft enough to scratch with a fingernail. Yet these spheres are harder than steel. Others are a composite of nickel and iron alloys that on Earth usually form in meteorites. In both cases, the surface finish is extraordinary with no visible signs of casting or welding. The grooves are uniform in depth and spacing as though cut with precision tools. Of course, the first assumption was that they were natural concretions, spherical mineral deposits that form in sedimentary layers over millions of years. That would explain their shape. Except it doesn't. Natural concretions are rarely this precise, and they certainly don't come with equidistant parallel grooves. The miners swore they'd seen spheres that spun slightly on their own in their display cases, as though affected by some subtle internal balance. When a few of the spheres were tested at the California Space Institute, their internal structure didn't match their exterior. Inside, some contained hollow cavities, lined with an incredibly thin layer of material harder than quartz. Others were denser at the core, with a composition that didn't occur naturally in pyrophyllite deposits. And strangest of all, a few displayed a faint magnetic field, unusual for non-ferrous minerals. Local legends among the Klerksdorp region's indigenous communities speak of sky seeds that fell to earth long before the ancestors came. They were said to carry the song of the world, and only the earth itself could keep them safe. In these stories, the seeds came from beings who planted them in stone so they would not be lost when the sky turned black. The skeptics, of course, have their counter-arguments. Metallurgists argue the grooves could be the result of pyrophyllite splitting along natural plains during metamorphic processes. But when you line up several spheres side by side, the grooves match so closely, it's as if they were designed to be part of a larger whole, like cogs or bearings in a machine. One researcher tried to model the wear patterns on a sphere in a computer simulation, assuming it had rolled or rotated for millions of years under pressure. The grooves should have eroded unevenly, but they hadn't. They were as sharp as the day they were made. That raises the uncomfortable question: if these really were crafted, who or what was making precision metalwork nearly 3 billion years ago? Some theorists place the spheres in the context of the ancient advanced civilization hypothesis, the idea that technologically capable beings existed on Earth long before modern humans evolved. Others suggest they could be remnants of alien probes seated here as part of a survey or experiment. The hollow spheres with thin, hard linings in particular look eerily like storage containers for something. And there's the mystery no one likes to talk about openly: the disappearance problem. Of the several dozen spheres that were cataloged in the 1980s and 1990s, only a handful remain in public or private collections. The rest have quietly vanished, lost, stolen, or locked away. In some cases, museum curators have reported them missing after inventory without further explanation. If you ever get the chance to hold one, the first thing you notice is the weight. It's heavier than it looks. The second thing is the balance. No matter how you turn it in your hand, it feels like it wants to settle into a certain position, as if it knows where it belongs. Some people claim they hear a faint hum when they're alone with it, a vibration you can feel in your fingertips more than hear with your ears. Standing at the mine where they were found, you can see the red cliffs layered with billions of years of Earth's history. Somewhere in that strata, deep enough that no human hands could have placed them in recent time, more spheres may still be waiting. Whether they're the remnants of a civilization we've forgotten, or something that was never meant to be part of human history at all, no one can say. But there's a strange comfort in the thought that these perfect little objects have been sitting quietly in the dark for longer than life itself has been walking this planet. Watching, waiting, perhaps for nothing, perhaps for something. And if the sky seeds in the old stories are real, maybe the earth isn't just holding them for us. Maybe it's hiding them from us. The desert wind here doesn't just sting your skin, it sings, a low whistling note that rises and falls as it moves through the carved ridges of rock, as though the stone itself is breathing. You're standing at the edge of an expanse of pale sandstone in the Al-Nasla desert of Saudi Arabia, staring at a cliff face that doesn't quite look natural. The lines are too sharp, the symmetry too exact, and the whole surface tilts forward slightly as though it's been leaning toward the sun for thousands of years. This is Al-Nasla, the split rock of Tama. From a distance, it looks like two enormous rectangular slabs propped against each other. But when you get close, you see that they were once a single block of stone perfectly split down the middle by a crack so clean it looks as though it was cut with a laser. The split is straight from top to bottom, with no jagged edges, no crumbling, no taper. And the two halves rest on small natural pedestals, like giant stone books propped open. Geologists will tell you that the split is the result of natural jointing fractures that occur in rock due to changes in temperature, moisture, and internal pressure. And sure, rocks split all the time. But not like this. Not with a gap barely wider than your hand running perfectly straight for 6 meters. Not with both halves remaining upright and balanced on narrow bases for what may be thousands of years. Then there's the surface itself. Etched into the sandstone are petroglyphs, animals, human figures, and symbols dating back to at least 2000 BCE. They're not random. The arrangement suggests they were deliberately placed around the split, almost as if the division in the rock was the central feature, the reason for the art. Local legends are older still. Bedouin stories speak of the Gate of the Jinn, a place where the spirit world bleeds into our own. They say travelers passing between the two halves sometimes vanish or emerge days later without knowing they've been gone. One tale describes a shepherd whose goats walked between the halves and emerged with their shadows, reversed an omen so dire that the herd was slaughtered on the spot. In the early 2000s, a team of archaeologists tried to survey the site with ground-penetrating radar. They didn't get far. Every attempt to scan deeper than a few meters returned garbled data-jagged spikes and voids that didn't match the geology of the surrounding desert. Their equipment worked fine at nearby sites, but here it was as if the stone itself was jamming the signal. Some fringe researchers have suggested the split is the remnant of a far older technology, a kind of quarrying or cutting method lost to history. They point out that other ancient sites, from the precision-cut blocks of Puma Punku in Bolivia to the laser-straight lines in Egypt's granite quarries, show signs of stonework far beyond what's expected for their era. If the same technology or the same people were here, it would mean Saudi Arabia once hosted a civilization capable of feats we can't easily replicate today. Others go further, proposing the crack is not a cut, but a seam, a deliberate joint between two halves of a larger structure now eroded. They imagine Al-Nasla as a fragment of some enormous monument or machine, the rest buried beneath the sands or long since dismantled. You approach the gap. The air between the slabs feels cooler, shaded from the desert sun, and the wind noise changes, becoming more focused, like a flute held to your ear. You can hear it now, a faint tone under the hiss of sand, steady and almost harmonic. It's easy to imagine it as the echo of something long gone, still resonating through the stone. Photographs from the last century show that the gap has not widened or shifted noticeably despite sandstorms, earthquakes, and the constant erosion of wind. The two halves stand exactly where they have for as long as anyone can remember, balanced on their narrow pedestals, like they're part of some cosmic balancing act. One night camping nearby, you hear the wind change. The tone deepens, becomes rhythmic, 4 beats, then a pause, then 4 again. You step out into the cool darkness. The moon is high, casting the split in sharp relief, and for a moment you could swear the two halves are closer together than they were in the daylight. You blink, and the illusion is gone. In the morning, you check your watch against your phone. Your watch says it's 7:13 a.m. Your phone says it's 6:48. You chalk it up to battery error. But a creeping thought settles in your mind. Maybe you didn't spend the whole night on this side of the split. Whether Al-Nasla is an accident of nature, the relic of forgotten technology, or a literal doorway between worlds, it has stood in this desert longer than the written history of the region. The wind still sings through it. The petroglyphs still watch from its flanks. And the gap, impossibly straight, impossibly clean, still waits like an invitation. The question is an invitation to where the Amazon at night is a wall of sound. Cicadas scream in the treetops, frogs click in the undergrowth, and somewhere far off, something large splashes into the river with a weighty whump. But in this particular bend of the Javari River, the noise thins. The frogs go quiet first, then the insects, until all that's left is the faint lap of water against your canoe. The locals say the forest here remembers. The satellite images were the first clue broad geometric patterns just beneath the soil of Brazil's acre state, visible only when the land was cleared for pasture. Circles, squares, intersecting lines, hundreds of them, etched into the earth across miles of rainforest. Archaeologists called them geoglyphs, but the term doesn't do them justice. Some are so precise they could have been drawn with a compass. Their ditches and embankments cut to exact depths and widths. Officially, they date to between 2,000 and 2,500 years ago, built by pre-Columbian cultures that left no written records. But radiocarbon testing of nearby charcoal has returned dates far older, up to 6,000 years, in some cases, pushing the existence of complex engineering in the Amazon back into the deep unknown. The trouble is, no one can explain how these geometric cities could have thrived here. The soil in much of the Amazon, known as laterite, is nutrient poor. Sustaining large populations should have been impossible without modern agriculture. Unless, of course, the builders knew a trick we've forgotten. And maybe they did. Surrounding many of the geoglyphs is a black, rich soil called terra preta, literally black earth. Unlike the surrounding dirt, terra preta is full of nutrients teeming with microscopic life, and it regenerates over time. Modern scientists still can't fully replicate it. Whoever created it wasn't just planting crops. They were engineering an ecosystem. The shapes themselves hint at something beyond farming. Some align with solstices and equinoxes, their entrances framing the rising sun on specific days of the year. Others link to nearby rivers in ways that suggest water management or even transport systems. And then there are the ones that baffle everyone, enormous isolated circles with no apparent entrances or internal structures, as if their purpose was not practical, but ceremonial or astronomical. Your guide, a wiry man from a nearby village, tells you the elders warn against visiting certain glyphs after dark. They are not empty, he says quietly. When pressed, he adds, they are sleeping. If you wake them, the forest will take you. You hike to one of the more remote circles, the air thick with humidity and the smell of wet earth. The clearing opens suddenly, the ground dipping into a perfect ring, about 12 feet deep and nearly 300 feet across. The embankments are lined with stone that should not be here, igneous rock miles from the nearest natural deposit, hauled here for reasons no one can guess. Standing in the center, you notice the stillness. No wind stirs the leaves, no birds call. You can hear your own heartbeat. The stone at your feet is warm, though the air is cool. You crouch and press your palm to it, half expecting to feel a pulse. You almost think you do. Legends among some Amazonian groups speak of the Yukshin, spirits, or beings who walked the earth before humans. They were said to build with light as well as stone, and to shape the ground so the stars could find them. When their time ended, they folded themselves into the forest to wait for its renewal. In 2018, a team of Brazilian archaeologists brought ground-penetrating radar to several of the glyphs. What they found beneath the soil stunned them, layered structures extending far deeper than the visible ditches, some dropping more than 30 feet below ground, with chambers and tunnels radiating outward. If these are buildings, they've been buried for millennia. If there's something else, no one is sure they want to know. One researcher who examined the radar data noted something strange. The underground structures formed patterns matching constellations visible from the Amazon 6,000 years ago, but not today. Precession. The slow wobble of Earth's axis has shifted the night sky since then. To design such a pattern, the builders would have needed either incredibly precise astronomical calculations or the memory of an older sky. At night, camped just beyond the embankment, you notice a faint luminescence along the ditch walls. At first, you think it's bioluminescent fungus common in the rainforest, but it's too uniform, outlining the entire circumference of the circle in a dim, steady glow. The guide pretends not to see it staring into the fire until you stop asking. You lie awake, the heat pressing against your skin, listening to the absence of sound. The longer you stare at the embankment's faint glow, the more it seems to shift, not in brightness, but in shape, as though the circle is flexing, subtly adjusting itself. It's probably an illusion. Probably. By dawn, the glow is gone, replaced by the earthy scent of rain-soaked soil. You walk the perimeter one last time before leaving, feeling the strange urge to count your steps. The number you end up with, exactly 366, is the number of days in a leap year. Coincidence or another deliberate design? The forest swallows the glyph. As you hike away, the sound of cicadas slowly returning. You know it's still there, sleeping under the canopy, its embankments tracing patterns, that may have been meant for the stars or for something that once walked beneath them. And you can't shake the feeling that if you returned on a certain night under a certain sky, you wouldn't find an empty circle at all. The water in Lake Baikal is so clear that on a calm day, you can see down nearly 40 meters straight into an alien blue world. It's the oldest and deepest lake on Earth, holding more fresh water than all the Great Lakes of North America combined. But beneath its glassy surface, the locals will tell you leave things that don't belong in any biology book. The first public whisper of them came in 1982, when a classified Soviet military training exercise went wrong. The story, half official report, half rumor, tells of a group of Navy divers stationed near Cape Ridey, tasked with testing new equipment at depths of around 50 meters. The water there was cold, but calm, the visibility perfect. That's when they saw them, 7 humanoid figures, pale and luminous in the blue gloom, hovering just beyond the divers' lights. They were huge, close to 3 meters tall, with elongated limbs and smooth, featureless helmets that upon closer inspection didn't seem to be helmets at all. No visible breathing apparatus. No tanks. They wore silver skin-tight suits that shimmered like fish scales when the light hit them. The divers approached cautiously, signaling to each other. The figures didn't retreat. Instead, they floated slowly upward as though inviting the humans to follow. 3 divers did. At about 70 meters, all 3 were suddenly struck by violent decompression sickness. The bends, despite still being far from their pressure limits. Emergency ascent procedures brought them to the surface, but one later died from the injuries. The official report described contact with unidentified underwater objects. The rest was buried under military secrecy. For years, the incident was known only through leaks and the accounts of retired officers. Then in the late 1990s, independent expeditions to Baikal began to collect their own stories. Fishermen claiming to see silver flashes beneath their boats, divers reporting sonar anomalies, and one team that swore their lights were shadowed by something enormous passing overhead. Baikal's size makes it easy for things to hide. At its deepest point, it plunges almost 642 meters deep enough to swallow the world's tallest building. Its bottom is a patchwork of underwater ridges, trenches, and geothermal vents. Some of those vents release heat, keeping certain pockets of water surprisingly warm year-round. Others leak methane in great shimmering columns that can distort sonar and confuse navigation. But some divers insist the warm pockets feel inhabited. In 2009, a team mapping the lake floor with submersibles reported structures, massive geometric shapes, half buried in silt. The shapes were too regular, too sharply angled to be natural formations. Their instruments failed moments later, forcing them to abort the dive. When they returned, the shapes were gone, as if the silt had shifted to cover them again. Local Buryat legends speak of the Lusud Khan, the water dragon master of Baikal, and his servants, silver people, who live in palaces beneath the waves. The stories say they guard the lake's deepest places and will punish those who disturb them. Older versions of the legend describe the silver beings as neither human nor fish, but something in between, capable of moving through water as easily as air. Even modern witnesses occasionally report strange events. In 2011, a research vessel recorded an object moving beneath it at over 80 kilometers per hour, far faster than any known submersible in the lake. The object was about 20 meters long and emitted no detectable noise. 2 minutes later, the ship's sonar failed completely. Standing on the rocky shore at dusk, you can see why Baikal breeds such stories. The lake seems endless, stretching out like a sea, its far shore blurred by haze. The water is so still, it reflects the sky perfectly until something disturbs it. You catch sight of a ripple far from shore with no boat or bird to cause it. A ring expands slowly, then disappears, leaving the surface glassy once more. Some say the silver-suited beings are relics of a civilization that lived here before the lake filled with water beings that adapted to the flood and remained. Others think they're visitors from elsewhere, using the lake as a hidden base. Skeptics argue it's all misinterpretation, large fish tricks of light faulty equipment. But that doesn't explain the decompression sickness incident, the sonar anomalies, or the structures glimpsed only briefly before vanishing again. You imagine being in that blue darkness, the cold pressing in when a pale human-shaped form drifts out of the gloom. Its movements are slow, deliberate, almost graceful. It watches you, though you can't see eyes, and you realize you've stopped breathing, transfixed. A hand rises not in threat, but in something like greeting. And then just as suddenly it glides backward and is gone, leaving only the hiss of your regulator and the pounding of your heart. On the surface, you'd tell yourself it was a trick of depth and light. But deep down, you'd know better. Because Lake Baikal is older than humanity, and it's had a very long time to keep its secrets. The Atacama Desert doesn't creep up on you. It hits you like a wall. One moment, you're winding through hills dotted with scraggly shrubs, and the next, everything goes flat and colorless, a salt-white plain, under a sky so wide it feels like the top's been taken off the world. The air here is so dry that wood left outside for a century will barely weather. It's also the only place where you can walk for miles without seeing a single living thing, unless you count the statues. They call them the Atacama Giants, though the most famous is singular, a massive geoglyph carved into the slope of Cerro Unitas. From the ground, it's just a strange scattering of lines on brown rock. But from the air, or standing far enough back, you see it a humanoid figure, over 380 feet tall. Arms outstretched its head, crowned with a rectangular headdress. The mainstream explanation is that it's an astronomical marker. Archaeologists say the figure's lines correspond to moon phases and constellations, acting as a prehistoric calendar for the people who lived here between 1000 and 1400 CE. That might be true, but there's something about the proportions, the style that feels older, much older. And it's not the only one. Scattered across the Atacama are hundreds of geoglyphs, llamas, serpents, concentric circles, and more human-like figures etched into hillsides or laid out with stones. Some of them are so faint they can only be seen in certain light, as if they were meant to be hidden until the right moment. Others are perfectly clear, even after centuries of wind and dust. Standing in front of the giant, you can't shake the sense that it's watching. The headdress looks almost like an antenna, 4 vertical protrusions that don't quite match any known ceremonial gear. The mouth is a simple line, but the eyes are small squares, perfectly symmetrical, like windows rather than facial features. Local legends, passed quietly among the Aymara and Atacameño people, tell of Gentiles, beings who ruled before the sun rose for the first time. They were giants taller than the mountains who shaped the land and the rivers. When the sun appeared, they turned to stone or dust, leaving only their images behind. Some say the geoglyphs are not depictions, but bindings marks to keep the Gentiles where they sleep. In 2003, a research team from Santiago used satellite imaging to map the geoglyphs' alignments. They found that while some match lunar cycles, others point to something stranger, specific points on the horizon that correspond not to the sun or moon, but to the rising points of stars that are no longer visible today. Precession, again the slow wobble of the Earth's axis, means those stars disappeared from view thousands of years ago, which raises the question: how could a culture from 1000 CE design markers for constellations they couldn't possibly see? Unless, of course, the knowledge was older, passed down from a time when those stars still lit the desert sky. You walk along the slope toward one of the smaller figures nearby, a spiraling pattern that seems to pull you toward its center. The stones that form it are dark volcanic rock carried here from miles away. There's no practical reason for this spiral to exist. It's too shallow to be a trap, too open to be a corral. It feels more like a signal. The wind rises suddenly, carrying the sharp tang of salt from the distant flats. For a moment, the giant seems to shimmer in the heat, its edges blurring, until it almost looks like it's shifting position. You blink, and it's still again, just lines on a hillside. In the 1970s, a pilot flying over the Atacama at night reported seeing a faint glow from the giant's outline, as though the rock itself were faintly luminescent. No scientific survey has ever confirmed this, and most dismiss it as a trick of moonlight. But every so often, you hear similar stories. Travelers swearing they saw a figure in the desert, glowing faintly under a starless sky. Some researchers speculate that the giant and geoglyphs like it may have served as territorial markers for ancient travelers crossing the desert. But that explanation doesn't quite fit. Why make them so large that they can only be fully appreciated from the air? Why embed astronomical alignments that would take generations to calculate? From the top of Cerro Unitas, the view is staggering, an endless sweep of desert, broken only by distant mountain ranges and the faint white crust of salt pans. The giant lies beneath you, too vast to take in all at once without turning your head. You try to imagine what it would look like from far above, say from the vantage point of someone arriving across the Pacific or descending from the sky. Perhaps the giant wasn't meant for human eyes at all. As the sun dips toward the horizon, the desert begins to cool shadows stretching long across the flats. You start back toward your camp, but something makes you turn around one last time. The giant square eyes seem to catch the last light, holding it for a fraction longer than the surrounding rock. It's easy to dismiss it as coincidence. Easier still to keep walking and not think about the possibility that some things in the desert aren't meant to be understood, only acknowledged from a respectful distance. Because in a place as old and empty as the Atacama, you can never be entirely sure that what's carved into the hills isn't also waiting just beneath them. The path to the site isn't on any tourist map. You follow a narrow trail cut into the limestone hills of southern Turkey, the air heavy with the scent of wild thyme and sun-baked rock. Your guide says little except to point out the old well at the fork in the path, a weathered ring of stone that locals claim has no bottom. You peer into it, but the sunlight never touches water, only darkness. When the ridge finally drops away, you see it concentric circles of massive stone pillars, each taller than a man standing in deliberate arrangements on a flattened hilltop. This is Gobekli Tepe Potbelly Hill, the oldest known temple complex in the world, built around 11,600 years ago. That's 7,000 years before Stonehenge, 6,000 before the pyramids. It rewrites the story of civilization entirely. Until Göbekli Tepe, the consensus was that humans built large monuments only after inventing farming, settling into permanent communities, and developing social hierarchies. But the builders of this place were hunter-gatherers, people who, according to the textbooks, shouldn't have had the time, organization, or skill to carve, transport, and erect pillars weighing up to 20 tons each. Yet here they are arranged in perfect circles and ovals, their surfaces covered in intricate carvings. Foxes, vultures, snakes, scorpions, and abstract symbols whose meanings have been lost. The precision is staggering. Many pillars are T-shaped with horizontal tops, resting on vertical shafts like stylized humans. Some have arms and hands carved along their sides, as if the stone itself is wearing a cloak. The carvings are deep and clean, suggesting advanced stoneworking tools or an unimaginable amount of patience with primitive ones. What's stranger is what's missing. There are no signs of permanent dwellings nearby. Whoever built Göbekli Tepe came here to work, to carve, to assemble, and then they left. Some researchers think it was a pilgrimage site, a gathering place for scattered tribes. Others believe it was a ritual center where ceremonies linked to the stars were performed. Because the stars are everywhere here if you know where to look. Several pillars align with constellations as they would have appeared in the sky 12,000 years ago. One pillar in particular, known as Pillar 43, or the Vulture Stone, shows a series of animals and abstract shapes that some scholars believe represent a comet strike, possibly the same cataclysm that ended the last ice age. Then there's the most puzzling fact of all. The site was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE. The infill isn't random debris. It's clean uniform and packed tight, as if someone went to great lengths to hide the entire complex. Why would anyone cover up something that took generations to build? Was it an act of reverence sealing it for the future? Or an act of fear hiding it from something or someone? Excavations have uncovered only a fraction of the hill, and ground-penetrating radar suggests dozens more stone circles lie buried beneath. If that's true, Gobekli Tepe is just the tip of a much larger complex one that could completely upend our understanding of human history. Your guide tells you about a local legend rarely shared with outsiders that speaks of the first ones who taught people to cut stone, track the stars, and call the rains. They demanded offerings in return, and when those offerings ceased, they walked away into the sky. The legend ends with a warning. When the first ones return, the stones will rise again. You walk between the pillars, running your fingers over the smooth limestone. The carvings are still sharp, untouched by the weather, thanks to their millennia underground. You can almost picture the seen torches flickering in the night shadows of carved animals dancing across the stones, voices chanting in a language no one alive remembers. Archaeologists have tried to replicate the construction methods using only the tools available at the time. Even with teams of modern volunteers, it takes days to carve a single shallow groove. Lifting and positioning a 20-ton pillar without metal tools or wheels. The experiments end in frustration or broken stone. Whoever built this had knowledge and techniques that we've lost. The sun dips low and the shadows lengthen between the stones. From certain angles, the T-shaped pillars begin to look less like symbols and more like figures, tall, broad-shouldered beings standing in silent formation. Their heads tilt toward the horizon where the first stars are beginning to appear. As you leave the site, you can't shake the feeling that the burial of Göbekli Tepe wasn't just an ending, it was a pause. The stones waited here for thousands of years, sleeping under the earth until we were ready to find them again. Whether we're ready for what they have to say is another matter entirely. The plain stretches out before you in a way that almost feels unnatural. Flat as a table, the horizon interrupted only by low rolling hills in the far distance. You're standing on the Bolivian Altiplano, 12,800 feet above sea level, where the air is thin and the light has a strange, sharp quality. And at your feet is a puzzle that has been gnawing at archaeologists for centuries, the ruins of Puma Punku. From above, the site doesn't look like much, just scattered blocks of red sandstone, an andesite, some as long as 26 feet lying in jumbled piles. But when you get close, the real strangeness comes into focus. These blocks aren't just big, they're precise. Their edges are laser straight. Their corners, perfect. Right angles. Their surfaces polished smooth. Some have interlocking shapes, complex notches and grooves that fit together like giant stone Lego. And then there are the drill holes. Perfectly cylindrical, evenly spaced, and cut into some of the hardest stone on Earth. Modern engineers who've examined them admit they'd need diamond-tipped tools to replicate the work today. Yet Puma Punku dates to at least 536 AD by conventional archaeology. and some believe it's far older, possibly thousands of years older, given the weathering and sediment layers found around its foundations. The puzzle deepens when you realize that the nearest quarry for the red sandstone is 10 kilometers away, and the andesite came from a mountain quarry over 90 kilometers away across rough terrain and a lake. Moving stones weighing up to 130 tons without cranes, wheels, or modern machinery seems almost absurd unless you knew a method that's been lost. Local Aymara legends speak of the Viracochas, tall, light-skinned, bearded beings who came from the sea and taught their ancestors the arts of building and agriculture. According to the stories, Puma Punku was built in a single night, after which the Viracochas vanished. The precision of the masonry is sometimes attributed to the singing stone's rocks that could be made to float through the air when exposed to certain sounds. You crouch beside one of the most famous blocks, the so-called H blocks. Each is carved with such uniformity that you could stack them together, and they'd align perfectly, even though they're scattered now. The recesses and projections on their surfaces are so consistent, they seem to have been mass-produced. Some engineers have suggested that the builders might have used molds to cast the stones from a kind of concrete. That could explain the precision, but geological analysis confirms these are solid quarried stones, not poured mixtures. The cuts are too crisp for chisels, too clean for pounding stones. They look machined. The layout of the site also raises questions. Although much of it is ruined, certain alignments suggest astronomical significance. One of the main gateways points toward the sunrise on the June solstice. Other features appear to align with lunar cycles, perhaps functioning as a calendar or observatory. And then there's the erosion, or lack of it. Despite centuries of exposure at such a high altitude, some edges remain as sharp as if they were cut yesterday. Whatever method was used to work, the stone must have been incredibly controlled, leaving surfaces that resist the wear of time. Walking through the scattered ruins, you try to imagine the original structure. Scholars believe it was a massive 4-level platform, each level slightly smaller than the one below, with polished gateways and staircases leading upward. It may have been part of the larger Tiwanaku complex nearby. But Puma Punku feels different, older, more refined, as if it was inherited by later builders who couldn't quite match the original craftsmanship. In 2014, a team using 3D scanning technology created digital models of the site and discovered that many blocks share identical dimensions down to fractions of a millimeter. That level of uniformity is difficult even with modern tools. How could a civilization with no known writing system, wheel transport, or metal saws achieve it? Some suggest that Puma Punku is a remnant of an even older civilization, perhaps one that collapsed at the end of the last ice age when rising seas and cataclysmic events reshaped the world. If so, its builders might have been among the last survivors, passing their skills to cultures that followed only for those skills to be forgotten over time. The wind picks up whistling between the stone blocks. You run your hand along one of the polished surfaces, feeling the cool smoothness beneath your fingertips. It's so flawless, it could almost be metal, not stone. You can't help but picture those legendary viracochas moving silently between the pillars, working with tools no one alive has seen, leaving behind a puzzle that still defies explanation. As the sun sets over the Altiplano, the shadows grow long, filling the carved recesses with darkness. From a distance, the scattered blocks start to look like a fallen machine, broken parts of something vast and intricate left to rust in the open air. And you wonder, was Puma Punku really a temple? Or was it something else entirely? A piece of technology so large and alien in function that we can't even recognize it for what it was. Whatever the answer, it sleeps now, under the thin Bolivian sky, its secrets locked in stone, harder than time. The Nile is quiet here, far from the bustle of Cairo, or the crowded tourist docks at Luxor. The water moves slowly green and glassy, its surface broken only by the occasional bird or drifting reed. On the western bank, the desert rises in golden waves, dotted with stone ruins that seem to shimmer in the heat. It's easy to miss the narrow track that leads to the cliffs, but if you follow it, the ground soon drops away into something that doesn't look like Egypt at all, a labyrinth carved deep into the earth. This is the Hawara Labyrinth, described by ancient writers with awe and bafflement. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, claimed it was a work surpassing even the pyramids, with 12 vast courts and 3,000 chambers, half above ground and half below, all connected by winding passages. The upper halls, he said, were decorated with reliefs and columns. The lower chambers, he was told, held the tombs of kings and sacred crocodiles. Strabo, the Greek geographer, saw it centuries later and confirmed its scale, describing columned halls and intricate courtyards. Today, almost nothing of that grandeur remains on the surface, just weathered blocks and an expanse of sand and mud brick debris. But the mystery is what lies beneath. In 2008, a joint Egyptian-Belgian team conducted a ground-penetrating radar survey of the area. What they found matched the ancient descriptions disturbingly. Vast rectangular structures buried deep under the sand with internal divisions that could correspond to corridors and chambers. The survey data has never been officially published. Some say the Egyptian authorities are waiting for further excavation permits. Others suspect the results are being withheld because the findings could challenge long-standing narratives about Egypt's past. Legends say the labyrinth was built by Pharaoh Amenemhat III of the 12th dynasty around 1800 BCE as part of his mortuary complex. But the sheer complexity of the underground layout and the fact that some of its stonework appears to predate the pharaoh's reign has fueled speculation that he may have inherited and expanded a much older structure. Imagine descending into that subterranean world, the air cool and dry, the light from your torch catching on smooth limestone walls. The ceilings are high, the passages wide enough for two men to walk side by side. Some chambers are empty, their floors swept clean, as though prepared for an arrival that never came. Others are lined with rows of stone niches, storage for scrolls perhaps, or the sacred objects of a vanished cult. And then there are the whisper stories passed down among local families that certain passages are not entirely stable, that the air in some chambers breathes as if connected to deeper voids. One tale tells of a group of treasure hunters in the 19th century who vanished after entering a newly exposed shaft. When rescuers went after them, they found the tunnel choked with a fine dry dust that seemed to have fallen from nowhere. One especially persistent rumor is that the lower chambers, those Herodotus claimed, housed the crocodile tombs, contain not just mummified animals, but artifacts and records from a time before the dynasties began. Some theorists link the labyrinth to the fabled Hall of Records, said to hold the knowledge of a civilization that existed before the Great Flood. The location of Hawara is suggestive too. It sits at the entrance to the Fayum Oasis, an area that was once connected to the Nile by a long canal. In antiquity, this would have made the labyrinth a kind of ceremonial gateway, a place travelers passed on their way from the river into the lush heart of the oasis. Anyone controlling this site would have commanded both the trade routes and the religious life of the region. In 2009, the Belgian researchers gave a quiet presentation of their radar findings in Brussels. A leaked summary described a massive multi-level subsurface complex extending far beyond the boundaries of the visible ruins. It noted that some areas appeared deliberately sealed with stone blocking that reflected radar scans more strongly than the surrounding material. Whatever was behind those seals had not been entered in millennia. You walk to the edge of the exposed ruins, the sand crunching under your boots. A low rectangular platform of limestone rises ahead, what's left of the mortuary temple's base. Beneath it, according to the ancient texts, the true entrance lies hidden. The wind picks up swirling grit across the stones, and you can almost imagine the shadow of a colonnade rising where now there is only open sky. The scale of the place is hard to grasp. If the buried chambers really stretch as far as the radar data suggests, the labyrinth could cover an area larger than some small towns. It's easy to see how the ancients might have thought of it, not just as a tomb or a temple, but as a world unto itself, a stone map of the cosmos, built to guide souls on their journey after death. But it could just as easily have been built to hide something. The entrance shafts are filled in now, sealed by centuries of collapse and deliberate burial. Yet the shape of the terrain hints at hollows beneath your feet. The sand feels strangely soft in places, as if the ground remembers the voids below. And as you stand there, staring out over the flat expanse, you can't shake the thought that the labyrinth might still be intact under the sand, its corridors silent, but unchanged its walls, waiting in the dark. Perhaps one day, someone will descend into them again. Torchlight flickering over hieroglyphs, unseen for thousands of years. Or perhaps it's better if it stays buried. Some doors once open can't be closed again. The wind off the Atlantic smells of salt and something older, like wet stone left in the sun too long. You're standing on the western coast of Ireland, where cliffs rise sheer from the sea, and the waves crash against them with the slow, relentless rhythm of centuries. From here, the Dingle Peninsula stretches into the distant green fields, ending in abrupt edges of rock. But just beyond the shore, half hidden by tides and time, lie the remains of something far stranger than the rugged scenery suggests. At low tide, the sea pulls back to reveal a causeway rows upon rows of hexagonal stone columns locked together like a puzzle. They march down into the water, vanishing beneath the surf as if leading toward a forgotten world. This is the Giant's Causeway's lesser-known cousin, a submerged structure locals call En Slig Fathach, the Path of the Giants. Unlike its famous namesake in Northern Ireland, this one has no tourist signs, no ticket booths, and it is not, as far as anyone can prove, volcanic. The columns here are smoother, less fractured, and arranged in deliberate arcs rather than random clusters. Divers who've explored the underwater sections report walls of the same hexagonal blocks rising several meters high, forming what looks like the remnants of streets or foundations. In some places, the pattern curves into perfect circles, plazas perhaps connected by narrow corridors that drop into deeper water. Geologists insist the formation must be natural, the result of basalt cooling in ancient lava flows. But the arcs and circles don't fit the random fracturing seen in volcanic patterns. Some blocks bear faint carvings, parallel lines, spirals, and what might be stylized waves, worn so smooth by the tide that you can only see them when the light hits at the right angle. Fishermen here speak of the sunken village, a place you can hear at night if you're unlucky. On certain still evenings, when the tide is slack and the wind dies, they say you can hear the ringing of bells from beneath the water. The sound is faint, almost like wind chimes, and always comes from the direction of the submerged causeway. Some claim it's the church bell of a drowned monastery. Others whisper about an older people, taller than the tallest man, whose halls still stand under the waves. One of the oldest Irish myths tells of Tir Fothon, the land beneath the waves, home to a race who built in stone so perfect it could not be destroyed. They traded with coastal villages in times before memory vanishing again into the sea when storms came. According to legend, they will return only when the land above has forgotten their names entirely. In 2016, a small research team from Galway University conducted sonar mapping of the area. The scans revealed geometric anomalies stretching far beyond the visible columns, regular patterns at depths of 20 to 30 meters, including what appeared to be a large rectangular enclosure nearly 200 meters across. Before further dives could be scheduled, funding was withdrawn, and the data was quietly archived. One of the researchers later hinted in an interview that quickly vanished from the university's website that some shapes are too straight to be nature's work. You arrive at low tide, stepping carefully across slick stones until you stand on the exposed causeway. The hexagonal tops are flat underfoot, like stepping stones laid by a meticulous hand. The sea laps gently at the edges, but you can feel the pull of deeper water beneath a slow-breathing motion as the tide shifts. As the sun sinks, the light turns gold, and for a moment, the wet stone reflects it like a mirror. In that reflection, The arcs and curves of the columns resolve into something almost architectural, a design you can half recognize, though you can't say from where. A floor plan, maybe. Or a map. Locals warn that the tide here rises faster than it seems. And they're right. One moment you're standing dry. The next, your ankles are in cold water. Still, you linger a moment longer listening. The waves crash against the cliffs beyond, but underneath that roar, you think you hear it, a faint bell-like tone that seems to come from far below, perfectly clear for just a heartbeat before fading into the surf. The return to shore feels slower than the approach. The wet stones are treacherous, and every step echoes in your ears. When you reach the grass above the cliffs, you turn back. The causeway is already slipping beneath the rising tide, its hexagonal pattern dissolving into the restless water. Tomorrow, it will be gone again, invisible to anyone who doesn't know exactly where to look. But it will still be there, its arcs and plazas hidden under green-black waves, its bells perhaps ringing for no one. And you can't help but wonder if somewhere down there past the reach of light, the streets are still intact, waiting for the day when the tide turns in their favor. The sun hangs low over the South Pacific, throwing a molten path of light across the water. Ahead, a jagged silhouette rises from the horizon, steep cliffs, crowned with sparse greenery, ringed by surf that crashes against black volcanic rock. You've seen photographs of Easter Island before, but nothing compares to approaching it from the sea. And nothing prepares you for the feeling that the island itself is watching you. The first thing you notice when you set foot ashore isn't the wind or the salt, it's the eyes. Not real ones, but the hollow sockets of the Moai, the colossal stone heads and torsos that stand scattered across the island. Some face inland, others gaze out to sea. Each is carved from volcanic tuff, weighing anywhere from 10 to over 80 tons. They're lined up in rows, as if frozen mid-ceremony. The official history says they were made by the Rapa Nui people between 1250 and 1500 CE. But questions linger, questions that don't fit neatly into the timeline. For one, the largest Moai ever carved, nicknamed El Gigante, still lies in the quarry partially detached from the bedrock. If completed, it would have stood 21 meters tall and weighed over 160 tons. Moving it across the island with wooden sledges or ropes, as some theories suggest, would have been almost impossible, especially since there's little evidence the island ever had enough trees to supply the needed timber. Then there's the matter of the eyes. Most Moai are eyeless now, but a few restored statues have been fitted with replicas of their original coral eyes. In Rapa Nui oral tradition, these eyes gave the statues mana, a spiritual force. Once activated, the Moai were said to watch over the island, protect its people, and even interact with the living in dreams. Legends speak of the island's first inhabitants arriving not from nearby Polynesia, but from a land far to the east that sank beneath the waves. They were led, the stories say, by a king who commanded the Moai to walk into place. Some anthropologists dismiss this as mythologized memory of transporting the statues upright using ropes rocking them from side to side. Others wonder if the legend hints at something stranger. The island itself is full of puzzles. Beneath some ahu, the stone platforms on which the Moai stand, are burial chambers and vault-like structures lined with basalt slabs. A few platforms have precisely fitted stonework reminiscent of Inca masonry in Peru, with interlocking blocks that have no mortar and fit so tightly you can't slip a knife blade between them. How two cultures separated by thousands of kilometers could produce such similar techniques is an open question. In 1914, British archaeologist Catherine Routledge recorded local accounts of underground caves linking different parts of the island. Some were natural lava tubes, but others appeared to have been deliberately shaped with smooth walls and carved steps descending into darkness. These caves were said to hold images that sleep and treasures from the time before the Moai. Many of them have since collapsed or been sealed either by erosion or by the islanders themselves. In 2009, a team excavating around the statues discovered that the heads were not just heads. At all, the Moai have full torsos buried up to their shoulders, covered by centuries of soil and volcanic ash. The buried sections are carved with intricate petroglyphs, crescents, spirals, and what appear to be representations of canoes and celestial events. If these carvings served a purpose, it's one we still don't fully understand. Standing before one of the inland-facing Moai, you feel the weight of its gaze, not just metaphorically, but almost physically, as if it's aware of you. The wind rushes between the cliffs, carrying the distant crash of waves. For a moment, you could swear you hear a low hum, like the vibration of something massive just beneath the range of human hearing. The mystery deepens when you learn about the rongorongo, tablets, wooden planks inscribed with a unique script found nowhere else on Earth. No one has conclusively deciphered it, though some believe it may record genealogies, calendars, or even migration routes. The oldest accounts say the script was passed down from the island's first settlers, brought from the land that drowned. Scholars point to ecological collapse and deforestation as the reasons for the fall of Rapa Nui's civilization. But among the Rapa Nui themselves, some believe the decline began when the Moai were toppled not just physically, but spiritually. Without their gaze, the island was left unprotected. You walk to the quarry at Rano-Raraku, where dozens of unfinished Moai lie, half buried in grass, their features frozen mid-creation. It's as if the workers simply walked away one day, never to return. Some statues lie face up, others face down, as though they'd fallen during transport. The reason for the sudden halt is still debated: warfare, famine, or something more abrupt and unexplained. As the sun sinks toward the horizon, you climb a low ridge overlooking the sea. A line of Moai stands silhouetted against the fading light, their faces turned inland, their backs to the ocean. You imagine them in their prime eyes, bright with coral and obsidian shadows stretching across the island. They were meant to guard. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you recall a line from a Rapa Nui elder recorded in the 20th century. They are not statues. They are the doors to what no one ever explained. But watching the last light fade over the endless Pacific, you can't help but think that maybe they were never meant to be just stone at all. The jungle in northern Cambodia doesn't just grow, it consumes. Roots wrap around temple walls, vines hang like curtains over crumbling archways, and moss creeps across stone carvings until the figures seem to dissolve back into the earth. Most visitors come here to see Angkor Wat, the famous jewel of the Khmer Empire. But a few hours' journey to the east lies something older, stranger, and almost forgotten, the ruins of Koh Ker. At the heart of this ancient complex rises Prasat Tom, a seven-tiered pyramid that looks more like something from Mesoamerica than Southeast Asia. It stands 118 feet high, its steps steep and narrow, its summit crowned with the remnants of a shrine. Archaeologists date Koh Ker's construction to the 10th century CE during the reign of King Jayavarman IV, who moved the Khmer capital here for just 16 years before it returned to Angkor. But there are signs that parts of the site predate his rule possibly by centuries. The pyramid stone blocks are massive, some weighing several tons, and fit together with unusual precision. Local legends say they were moved not by men, but by a Garuda, a mythical bird who carried the stones in its claws and set them in place at the king's command. Some elders add a more unsettling detail, that the pyramid was built to house a stone of power fallen from the sky. That stone may have been real. Some believe it refers to a massive linga, a sacred symbol of the god Shiva, which once stood in the summit shrine. It was said to be made from a material unlike any found in the region, dark and metallic with a faint inner glow. Historical records suggest it was removed centuries ago, possibly taken to Angkor or looted by invaders. No one knows its fate. Walking through Koh Ker, you notice something else unusual: the alignment. Many Khmer temples are oriented toward the east, but Koh Ker's main axis points 14 degrees north of east, directly toward the rising of the star Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. This has led some researchers to speculate that Koh Ker wasn't just a political capital, but an astronomical center, its pyramid serving as both temple and celestial observatory. The city surrounding Prasat Tom once covered more than 30 square kilometers with dozens of temples, reservoirs, and causeways. Yet it feels different from Angkor, more isolated, less ceremonial, as if its purpose was specific and secret. Some of the smaller temples are decorated with fierce guardian figures and scenes of battle, rather than the serene apsaras found in Angkor's reliefs. There are also the tunnels. In 2012, a group of local explorers reported finding a partially collapsed passage beneath one of the smaller shrines. The tunnel was lined with dressed stone and descended steeply before ending in a chamber whose walls were covered in carvings, unlike any known Khmer art. The explorers claimed the carvings depicted star patterns and a large bird carrying what looked like a glowing sphere. The entrance collapsed during the rainy season, and it has not been officially excavated since. Your guide warns you not to wander too far from the main paths. Landmines from Cambodia's recent conflicts still lie hidden in parts of the jungle. The air is thick with humidity, and every step stirs the scent of damp earth and old stone. Climbing the pyramid is not for the faint of heart. The steps are tall, uneven, and weathered, and the view from the top is dizzying. The surrounding forest stretches to the horizon in all directions, a green ocean dotted with the occasional rise of a temple spire. Standing here, you can imagine what it must have been like 1,000 years ago, when the shrine at your feet still held its strange sky-born stone, and the night sky was red like a holy text. Some fringe theorists believe Koh Ker's true purpose was as a beacon or signal station, its pyramid designed to channel energy toward the heavens. They point to the alignment with Sirius, the local legends of a celestial stone, and the unusually short period during which Koh Ker served as the Khmer capital. Perhaps it was built for one specific event, and once that event passed, it was abandoned. On the descent, you pass a weathered carving of a giant serpent coiled around a tower. Your guide tells you it represents the Naga, a divine serpent who guards treasures and secret knowledge. According to legend, the Naga will one day return to reclaim what was stolen from Koh Ker. As you step off the pyramid and back into the jungle path, the light begins to fade, and the forest comes alive with the sounds of cicadas and distant bird calls. You glance back at Prasat Tom, its silhouette sharp against the deepening sky. The alignment towards Sirius suddenly feels less like coincidence and more like a message, one written in stone, waiting for the right night to be read again. The jungle may have claimed most of Koh Ker, but the pyramid still stands its steps, worn by centuries, its summit empty, but not silent. And you can't help but feel that somewhere, perhaps deep underground or in some guarded vault, the strange stone of power still exists, waiting for its rightful place to be restored. The Aegean sun is merciless, baking the white cliffs until the heat seems to radiate from every surface. Below you, the water glitters with that impossible shade of blue, unique to the Greek islands, and the air smells faintly of salt and thyme. It could be any Cycladic island, except for the fact that this one has no hotels, no postcard shops, no crowds. In fact, there are no permanent residents at all. This is the island of Delos, once the most sacred place in the ancient Greek world, and even now it feels like it's holding its breath. According to myth, Delos was the birthplace of Apollo and Artemis. The gods themselves, the story goes, anchored the island in the middle of the sea so their mother Leto could give birth away from the wrath of Hera. From that moment on, Delos was sacred ground. For centuries, no one was allowed to die or be born here. If you were close to either event, you had to be ferried to a neighboring island. Walking through the ruins today, it's hard to imagine that this barren, uninhabited island was once a bustling hub of trade, religion, and politics. Marble streets lead between roofless temples. Colonnades cast sharp shadows across the dust, and the remains of private houses still bear mosaics of dolphins and lions. But the strangest thing about Delos isn't what's above ground. It's what might be buried beneath. Ancient sources hint that the visible ruins are only part of a much larger complex some of which has been deliberately hidden. Pausanias, the 2nd century Greek traveler, wrote cryptically about the deep chambers beneath the lion's gaze, a possible reference to the famous Terrace of the Lion Stone Guardians that still stand in a row, staring eternally out to sea. Some archaeologists think there may be underground sanctuaries or storage rooms still sealed from antiquity. One persistent legend speaks of the Huron Hypogeos, a subterranean temple said to hold relics brought from the farthest edges of the known world. The story claims these relics were offerings to Apollo given by sailors and traders in exchange for safe passage. Some were supposedly ordinary treasures, gold, ivory-carved gemstones, but others were described as objects not made by mortal hands. In the early 20th century, French archaeologists uncovered a series of small underground chambers beneath one of the sanctuaries filled with pottery figurines and offerings from as far away as Egypt and Persia. But one section of the site, a blocked-off tunnel leading toward the shoreline, was never excavated. Officially, it was due to concerns about structural stability. Unofficially, whispers among the diggers suggested they found something there, something they were instructed not to discuss. The island's location made it a perfect crossroads. Traders from Phoenicia, Egypt, and even the distant Atlantic would have passed through each, bringing their own gods, myths, and artifacts. It's not hard to imagine Delos as a kind of cultural vault, collecting sacred and mysterious objects from around the world. The question is, where did they all go? Standing before the Terrace of the Lions, you notice how their eyes align with a distant point on the horizon. On certain days of the year, the rising sun passes directly between their heads, casting long shadows straight toward the Temple of Apollo. But if you follow that line in the opposite direction back toward the sea, it points to a rocky islet a few hundred meters offshore. Divers have found traces of stone blocks beneath the water there, as if a small shrine or pier once stood above the waves. Local fishermen tell of seeing strange lights in that water at night, soft glows that hover just below the surface, moving slowly as if carried by unseen hands. They avoid the area, muttering that the old gods still guard their treasures. In recent years, satellite imaging has revealed faint outlines on Delos that don't match any mapped ruins patterns in the soil, suggesting buried walls and passages. The Greek government has been cautious about authorizing digs, partly to protect the island's fragile ruins, and partly, some suspect, because they're not eager to stir whatever might be sleeping down there. You wander down to the sacred harbor, now silted and dry. In antiquity, this was where pilgrims arrived, their ships heavy with offerings. Standing on the old quay, you can almost hear the echoes of chanting, the splash of oars, the clink of gold being carried up the marble steps. And you wonder if some of those offerings never made it to the temples above, but instead disappeared into the deep chambers Pausanias hinted at. As the sun begins to set, the light turns the marble a soft honey color, and the lions on their terrace seem almost alive. Their unblinking stone gaze follows the horizon, watching something you can't see. Maybe they're keeping watch over an empty sea. Or maybe they're guarding the entrances to something that's been hidden for 2,000 years, a network of vaults and passages where the most precious, most dangerous relics of the ancient world still lie in the dark. The rule still holds: no one may be born or die on Delos. But perhaps there's another unspoken rule here, one the archaeologists and locals alike have agreed upon. Some things are better left buried. The desert in southern Peru is a strange place, flat, arid, and seemingly empty, yet humming with a kind of silence that makes your ears ring. The sun blazes down on an expanse of reddish-brown earth, broken only by low hills and the occasional dry riverbed. At first glance, it's hard to believe anything could survive here, let alone something that has baffled the world for nearly a century: the Nazca Lines. From the ground, you can walk across them without even realizing you're in the middle of a massive design. They're shallow trenches, no more than a few inches deep, scraped into the desert surface to expose the lighter soil underneath. But from above, where they were clearly meant to be seen, they form enormous figures: a hummingbird, a spider, a monkey, a condor, and dozens of other shapes, each hundreds of feet across. Alongside these animals are long, perfectly straight lines that run for miles as if drawn with a ruler, intersecting in complex patterns that sometimes end abruptly in geometric shapes. Mainstream archaeology dates the lines to between 500 BCE and 500 CE, created by the Nazca culture. The accepted explanation is that they were ceremonial pathways walked during religious rituals to honor gods associated with water and fertility. And yet, the precision of some lines is unnerving. Without any aerial view, how could ancient builders maintain straightness over such vast distances? How did they keep proportions so perfect in figures larger than football fields? Some researchers believe the lines form a giant astronomical calendar, marking solstices, equinoxes, and the rising or setting points of certain stars. Others suggest they point to underground water sources, vital in a desert where rain almost never falls. Still others notice that some figures seem to be in motion. The monkey's tail spirals clockwise, the hummingbird's beak aligns with a specific sunrise, and the spider's legs are in positions that correspond to constellations. Then there are the more unsettling ideas. In the 1970s, author Erich von Däniken famously proposed that the Nazca Lines were landing strips for extraterrestrial craft. While most scientists reject this outright, they can't deny the oddity of certain massive rectangles and trapezoids, areas of the desert smoothed flat and rock-free, unlike the surrounding ground. From the air, they do look eerily like runways. Local legends predate all of this speculation. Some Nazca descendants tell of the Apu sky beings who taught their ancestors how to read the stars and call the clouds. These beings, the stories say, traveled in great shining vessels that came and went along paths marked on the earth. When they departed for the last time, the lines remained part map, part message, waiting for their return. In 2018, A team of Japanese archaeologists discovered over 140 new geoglyphs in the region using drones. Many are faint, eroded, nearly invisible from ground level, and depict humanoid figures, birds in abstract shapes unlike the classic Nazca designs. Some of the humanoids have large round heads and exaggerated eyes, unlike any known art style in the region. Walking the desert yourself, you can't see the figures, only the rust-colored soil stretching to the horizon. The heat is oppressive, and the silence presses in. But climbing a nearby viewing tower, you suddenly see it. The graceful outline of a hummingbird wings, spread beak pointing to the east. Even from this limited height, the precision is breathtaking. What's even more peculiar is that the lines have survived for centuries without significant erosion. The desert's lack of rain, combined with its stable wind patterns, has preserved them as if they were drawn yesterday. In a way, the entire plateau is a kind of time capsule. Once something is placed here, it stays untouched for millennia. But this preservation raises a strange question. If the lines are so enduring, could they be even older than we think? Without organic material to carbon date their age is inferred from artifacts found nearby. It's possible some of them predate the Nazca, entirely inherited by later cultures, who added their own designs. As the day ends, you watch the long shadows stretch across the desert. From certain angles, the lines catch the light differently, becoming more visible, as if they were designed to be read not just from above, but at specific times of day. The air cools quickly, and the first stars appear. Looking up, you realize some of the constellations match the forms on the ground below. It's easy to dismiss the Nazca Lines as ritual art, as symbols carved for gods in the sky. But standing here, with the desert stretching endlessly around you, it's just as easy to believe they were meant for someone or something that could see them in their entirety. The lines remain etched in silence, waiting for the moment when whoever they were made for finally comes looking again. The Mediterranean sun glitters on the surface of the sea, but beneath the water lies something older than any ship now crossing it. Off the southern coast of Japan's Yonaguni Island, divers discovered what might be one of the strangest archaeological mysteries in the world. A place some call the Yonaguni Monument, and others call proof of a civilization that existed before history began. From the surface, the water above the site is an endless expanse of deep blue, but as you descend, the shadow of something massive emerges from the gloom terraces, platforms, and staircases carved into solid rock, all connected like a submerged fortress. The largest structure is over 500 feet long and rises more than 75 feet from the seabed, its edges sharp enough to look man-made, even after centuries underwater. Mainstream geologists argue the formations are natural, the result of tectonic activity and the fracturing of sandstone. But divers and some researchers point out that many of the angles are perfectly square, with steps of uniform height, smooth vertical walls, and flat surfaces that meet at precise right angles. One section even resembles a grand staircase leading to a raised platform, like the stage of an ancient amphitheater. And then there are the details, patterns carved into the stone that look like symbols, channels that could be drainage or irrigation lines, and what some believe to be the remnants of a road leading away from the main monument. In certain light, these roads align with other submerged rock formations stretching toward nearby islands, as if they were once part of a larger city. If the Yonaguni monument is man-made, the big question is when it was built. The site lies about 26 meters, 85 feet below the surface. Sea levels have risen significantly since the last ice age, but they haven't been that high in recorded history. To have been above water, the monument would have to date back at least 10,000 years long before the first known civilizations. This date aligns uncomfortably well with flood myths from around the world, including Japanese legends of a lost land called Mu. According to the stories, Mu was a vast island nation that sank into the ocean after a series of catastrophic earthquakes. Its survivors scattered across the Pacific, bringing with them knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and stoneworking. Local Okinawan fishermen had known about the underwater structures for decades before their discovery in the 1980s. They spoke of a place they called Iseki Point, the Ruins Point, and told of fishing nets snagging on strange sharp-edged stones far below. Some even claimed to see lights shimmering from the depths at night, though whether from bioluminescent creatures or something else is anyone's guess. In 1997, Japanese marine geologist Masaki Kimura began studying the site, extensively mapping its features and documenting what he believed were clear signs of human alteration. Among them, a series of steps each exactly 1 meter high, a carved road with guardrail-like ridges, and a possible stone carving of a human face, eroded but still visible when the light hits at the right angle. Skeptics argue these features could all be natural, the result of sandstone's tendency to fracture along horizontal and vertical lines. But if that's the case, why are there so many right angles, so many perfectly flat surfaces all concentrated in one location? Nature loves chaos. This place is all order. Diving here is surreal. Schools of fish sweep past the terraces, darting into crevices that might once have been hallways. Soft corals cling to the edges of the steps, waving in the current. You run your gloved hand along a wall, feeling the unnerving smoothness beneath centuries of marine growth. Looking up the surface seems impossibly far away, a shifting silver ceiling above the monument's shadowy bulk. Some researchers have suggested that if Yonaguni is indeed man-made, it might have been a quarry or ceremonial center, its builders carving into a natural rock outcrop to create monumental shapes. Others think it could have been part of a port or harbor, especially given its proximity to other submerged sites in the region. The deeper you go into the mystery, the more it seems connected to other ancient enigmas. The megalithic ruins of Nan Madol in Micronesia, the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, even the lost cities hinted at in Aboriginal and Polynesian oral traditions. Could they all be remnants of the same seafaring culture, erased by rising seas and remembered only in myth? As you ascend toward the surface, the monument fades back into the blue, its sharp lines blurring into shadow. The current tugs at you as if urging you away. You break the surface into bright sunlight, the island's green hills visible in the distance. It's tempting to think of Yonaguni as a solitary mystery, a strange accident of geology. But the human mind keeps circling back to those perfect angles, those long level terraces, that grand staircase leading to nowhere. If the sea ever gives it back, we might finally know whether Yonaguni is just an oddly shaped rock or the last surviving stage of a civilization that built in stone before the rest of the world had even picked up a chisel. The Sahara is not all endless dunes, at least not if you know where to look. Deep in its southern reaches, in a region so dry, the air feels like it's been baked in an oven, lies a plateau, scattered with wind-carved rock formations, and the ruins of something no one expected to find in the middle of a desert, the stone city of Guelta Zemor. Today, it's little more than a scattering of walls and collapsed towers. It's sandstone blocks worn smooth by centuries of sandstorms. But when you climb the low rise overlooking the site, you can trace the outlines of streets, courtyards, and something that looks remarkably like a defensive wall. And that's odd, because the ruins are believed to be far older than the need for fortifications here. Local Tuareg tradition says this was once part of a green Sahara, a time when rivers flowed and lakes shimmered under the sun. The city, they say, was not built by their ancestors, but inherited from an older people, ones who followed the stars to find their way. According to the stories, these people vanished when the desert came, leaving behind only stones too heavy for the wind to move. Archaeologists have found fossilized remains of fish crocodiles and hippos. Within a short walk of the ruins, clear evidence that this was once a thriving wetland. The dating of the city itself is less certain. Some pottery fragments suggest human occupation as far back as 5000 BCE. But other elements, the size of the stone blocks, the alignment of certain walls, hint at something even older. And the alignments are where things get strange. Several of the city's surviving structures line up with the solstices and equinoxes. One avenue in particular points directly to the rising of the constellation Orion's Belt, as it would have appeared about 12,000 years ago, long before most historians believe organized cities existed. The blocks used in construction are massive, some weighing several tons. They fit together with such precision that in some places you can barely slip a knife blade between them. This style of masonry is reminiscent of ancient Andean and Mediterranean stonework, though Guelta Zemor lies thousands of miles from either. If the builders were using the same techniques, it suggests either shared knowledge or a level of architectural sophistication that developed independently in multiple places much earlier than we thought. In the 1960s, a French expedition to the area reported finding carved symbols on several fallen stones. The markings didn't match any known script, but repeated certain shaped circles with radiating lines intersecting triangles and what appeared to be stylized animals. Unfortunately, many of the marked stones have since been buried again by shifting sand and only a few photographs remain. Satellite imagery has revealed that the ruins are just one part of a larger pattern. Faint outlines in the desert surface that could be the foundations of additional buildings, canals, or even a harbor, something almost impossible to imagine in today's climate. If true, it would mean this was once a major settlement connected to a much wetter landscape. The Tuareg tell of a lake without end that once lay beyond the city, and of travelers who came from far to the west in boats made of shining skin. Some historians dismiss these as exaggerations of contact with early Saharan cultures, but others wonder if they might be half-forgotten memories of seafaring visitors from the Atlantic coast or even beyond. As you walk the site, the heat is intense, and the light reflecting off the pale sandstone is blinding. Yet in certain shaded corners of the ruins, you find lichen clinging to the stone, a reminder that life always finds a way. In one collapsed chamber, you notice a section of wall that curves inward like the apse of a temple. At its base lies a single perfectly round stone basin, its surface smooth as glass. Was it for water rituals or something else entirely? It's tempting to imagine the city at its height, stone walls gleaming under a gentler sun, canals lined with palms, markets filled with the sounds of voices and music. In that vision, the desert is still hundreds of miles away, and the air smells not of dust, but of wet earth after rain. And then, almost without warning, the rains stop. The rivers shrink, the lake recedes, and the wind begins to bring sand where once there was soil. The people leave, perhaps to follow the retreating water, perhaps to seek out other green lands. They take what they can, but the stone blocks remain too heavy, too permanent. Over time, the city is swallowed piece by piece until only the tallest walls poke above the dunes. Standing here now, surrounded by silence, broken only by the hiss of sand in the wind, you can't help but feel that the desert is guarding the place. The sands shift constantly, revealing a wall one year and covering it the next, as if the ruins are allowed to be seen only briefly before they vanish again. Some researchers believe that more of the city could be buried intact under the dunes, waiting for excavation. Others warn that unearthing it could expose fragile remains to rapid erosion. And there are those mostly locals who say the city should remain as it is hidden, because it still belongs to them, though no one will say exactly who they are. As you prepare to leave, you glance back one last time. The sunlight catches the edge of a wall, and for a fleeting second, you think you see a shadow move along it, tall, upright, gone before you can focus. Just the wind, you tell yourself. But it leaves you wondering if the builders of Guelta Zemur are as gone as we think. In the Sahara, time and distance blur. 1,000 years can vanish like a footprint in the sand. But sometimes the sand also preserves holding onto pieces of the past until it decides we're ready to see them again. The Caribbean sun is sharp, the kind that makes the sea shimmer as if it's been dusted with powdered glass. You're standing on the edge of a small Bahamian island, the water so clear you can see the rippled sand 10 feet below. A few meters offshore, Dark lines crisscross the pale seabed in a pattern too straight, too deliberate to be coral or current-swept rock. Locals call it the Bimini Road, but to some, it's the edge of a lost world. The road is a series of massive flat limestone blocks arranged in a long curving formation about a third of a mile from shore. Each block is rectangular or square, and they fit together like paving stones in a giant's causeway. Some are over 12 feet long, weighing several tons, yet they rest in shallow water as if carefully laid there. From above, the formation appears to lead into deeper water, disappearing into the blue. Mainstream geology offers a natural explanation. The blocks are beach rock sedimentary stone formed along ancient shorelines that fractured and settled in place when sea levels rose thousands of years ago. Wave action and erosion geologists say simply gave them their neat, blocky appearance. But divers and alternative researchers point out details that don't fit. Some blocks have rounded beveled edges, as if shaped to fit snugly with their neighbors. Others have small notches or grooves cut into them, like the kind you'd expect if ropes or beams had once been secured there. In a few places, smaller stones are stacked on top of larger ones, creating what look suspiciously like retaining walls. And most intriguingly, certain sections of the road seem to curve intentionally, forming angles too sharp to be explained by random fracturing. The Bimini Road entered the public imagination in the late 1960s, when its discovery coincided almost too neatly with a prediction made by the American psychic Edgar Cayce decades earlier. Cayce had claimed that part of Atlantis would rise near Bimini in the late 1960s or early 1980s, and when the underwater blocks were found in 1968, believers saw it as confirmation. The Atlantis theory has clung to the site ever since. Supporters note that the Bahamas would have been prime coastal land during the last ice age when sea levels were lower by more than 300 feet. If a sophisticated maritime culture existed, then its ports and harbors could now be underwater, hidden beneath millennia of sediment. Local fishermen have their own stories. Some say their grandfathers spoke of roads under the sea that once connected the islands, traveled by people who came before the islands broke apart. A few even claim to have found worked stone columns and circular foundations in deeper water, nearby objects that, if real, are now buried under sand. In 2007, a group of marine archaeologists surveyed the Bimini Road with high-resolution sonar and found additional stone alignments extending beyond the visible curve. Some were buried under a thin layer of sediment, suggesting the formation is larger and more complex than previously thought. Yet without definitive artifacts, pottery tools, inscriptions, the debate remains unresolved. You slip into the water and swim toward the blocks. The clarity is uncanny. Shafts of sunlight ripple across the stone as small fish dart between gaps. Running your hand along the surface, you feel the edges smooth in some places, sharp in others. At one corner, a groove runs straight for several feet before ending abruptly like the track of some long-vanished tool. Following the curve of the road, You notice how it seems to lead toward a deeper shelf. In the hazy distance, the seabed drops off into a darker blue, hinting at greater depths where more could be hidden. Divers have reported seeing large scattered blocks down there, too heavy to have been rolled by waves, but too far apart to be part of a natural reef. The water is calm, but there's an odd stillness here, as though even the sea is holding its breath. Looking up toward the surface, you catch a flicker of movement, a shadow passing overhead. Just a harmless school of fish, you tell yourself, though the feeling lingers. If the Bimini Road is natural, it's an extraordinary accident of geology. If it's artificial, it could be the last surviving trace of a civilization erased by the ocean thousands of years ago. And if the old Bahamian legends are right, it might only be one visible section of a much larger network, with other roads and structures lying undiscovered beneath the silt and coral. As you return to shore, the curve of the stones remains in your mind like the half-remembered melody of a song you can't place. You can't help but think of how many coastlines the world over were swallowed by the sea after the last ice age, and how much of humanity's early story might be lying in shallow bays and continental shelves, invisible until the tide or curiosity pulls it back into the light. The sun is setting now, staining the water gold. The road is still there, quietly catching the light, its blocks unchanged for centuries. Whether it once carried the feet of a forgotten people, or has always been the work of nature, it remains a path into mystery, one that doesn't care whether we ever learn the truth. And maybe that's the point. The tide of our journey has finally rolled back, leaving us standing on a quiet shore in the mind. We've walked through lost cities and sunken harbors, touched the sharp edges of ancient stone, and listened to stories whispered across thousands of years. Some of what you've seen tonight was built by hands like yours, under suns and skies you'd recognize. Some may have been shaped by forces we still don't fully understand. And that's the beauty of it. The past isn't a straight road lined with neatly labeled signposts. It's a winding path through overgrown forests, where every so often you stumble upon something so strange, so perfectly out of place, you have to stop and wonder how it ever came to be. You've crossed deserts where the wind guards ruins like a jealous sentinel. You've stood beneath the gaze of statues that might be more than just stone. You've drifted over roads that vanish into the blue, wondering who or what first walked them. The world is quieter now. Your breathing has slowed to match the rhythm of waves against a forgotten key. Outside your window, the night is folding itself around you, and the mysteries we've explored begin to fade into that half-light where dreams begin. If you listen, you might still hear them. The bells under the sea, the hum of wind in ancient corridors, the soft, impossible footstep of someone who should not be there. But here, in this moment, you're safe. The mysteries will wait. They always do. So close your eyes. Let the stones, the sands, and the tides carry you somewhere gentle. And when you wake, maybe the world will look just a little bit stranger